on this episode.
We emphasize what I think will probably be a recurring theme tonight in our conversation, that we suspect most people struggle to accept the idea that there's a conspiracy here.
What people, I guess, don't understand about me is that there's a much deeper why to this than just September 11th.
Go and guard, protect the base, right? One of the most important things that you could possibly do as a soldier. And you're not giving anything, you're given no tools to actually protect the base.
Please never, ever, ever go and be a cop. Number one, you'll be hated. But number two, it's more corruption and politicking than you'd ever believe.
Oh, yeah, and let's not even talk about the fact that commercial airplanes aren't even capable of flying that speed at that low.
Imagine, if you will, a day that began like any other. Sunrise warming the concrete of the Pentagon, a fortress of defense that symbolizes America's might. It's September 11th, 2001, and as the clock strikes 9:37 a.m., a shadow descends. A plane crashes into the heart of this citadel, a moment etched in history. A moment shrouded in veils of confusion and chilling questions. But tonight, dear listeners, we embark on a journey down a rabbit hole where the official narrative intertwines with whispers of conspiracy. What if the story we were told was merely a polished facade concealing the unsettling truths lurking beneath? What if the destruction that occurred was not simply the result of terror, but a stage for a far more sinister plot? Join me and my co-host, Mr. Phillips, as we welcome Adam Eisenberg, an eyewitness who stood at the precipice of chaos, a soldier who witnessed the aftermath and anomalies that could rewrite the script. His work with the Orion Project seeks not just to unveil the absurdities hidden in plain sight, but to ignite the flames of accountability. Prepare yourselves, for we are about to peel back the layers of deception and embark on an exploration of the Pentagon attacks that challenges everything you think you know. Are you ready to question the unquestionable, to confront the shadows that linger over that fateful day? Step into the realm of the unknown, where the truth may be stranger than fiction. Welcome to Cocktails and Conspiracies. Adam, it's a pleasure and a privilege to have you here joining us on the show tonight.
Same with you, fellas. I really appreciate it. And everybody that's listening, I wish that this finds you well. And I don't have a cocktail, but I've got a soda water. But, I'll
pretend.
I'm going to be doing a lot of
cheers.
Talking, so I'm not going to start drinking any cocktails anytime soon. So cheers.
We found it loosens us up a little bit. It kind of gets the juices flowing. So, and it's a catchy name. We're not always drinking cocktails.
It's
Sometimes
one of my specialties.
It's a mocktail.
I'm very good at it. Shane can speak for himself.
Absolutely.
It depends on the day. Sometimes it's a little more club soda than it is hard alcohol, but to each its own. Nice. Back in episodes 106 and 107, we talked about 9/11 and specifically Building 7 and the Twin Towers. We spent over 3.5 combined hours with Richard Gage talking about September 11th. And during those episodes, Tim and I really emphasized how impactful that was for us, just the whole entire event, given the proximity that we were to Ground Zero when it all happened, and the fact that it happened within our lifetime. We emphasize what I think will probably be a recurring theme tonight in our conversation, that we suspect most people struggle to accept the idea that there's a conspiracy here because it hits so close to home. Nobody wants to believe that it could happen within our watch, so to speak. But even in those 3.5 hours, we really only spoke on one aspect of 9/11. And I think our goal tonight is to look at kind of an often overlooked aspect, the Pentagon. Before we go there, though, I just want to kind of talk to our audience a little bit about who you are, Adam. Who was Adam Eisenberg and what was he doing before 9/11?
Well, before 9/11, he was a private full of piss and vinegar, and at a very young age, I joined the military at 19, and my original intent was to go into the military as an Army Ranger. And prior to September 11th, our military and our entire force was, I guess you could say, not focused on being so deployed, so in action. And so the Ranger Battalion at that point in time was overstaffed with infantry folks. They just didn't need us. If you were a soft skill MOS, a cook, communications, other things, they needed you. So I originally went in to serve as a Ranger. And when I went to that process, I found out that just being an infantryman was not the way to go. And so I found myself in a worldwide status, and that is basically you kind of are at the needs of the military. Well, I come to find out that through a friend that had grown up in Washington, D.C.'s region, there was a very elite unit there called the Old Guard, the 3rd U.S. Infantry. And so went to the Old Guard recruiter at Fort Benning, Georgia, and that's where I learned about the different missions that were going on. And at that point in time, they were specifically trying to fill a company, which was Alpha Company, which was the oldest active infantry company in the Army. That company actually goes back all the way to the days of General Washington.
Wow.
So they needed people in that company. And, I was 19, I was young. And they basically started to throw the stuff that any private wants to hear at them, about the nightlife in D.C. and the male to female ratio and how there's so many women running down there. So needless to say, I jokingly say that, but they sold us on the types of training that we were going to be doing in the capital region, the types of missions that they were going to prepare for, fight to the last person type of missions, and then the ceremonial responsibilities of burying people in Arlington Cemetery, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, being one of the Army's foremost, I guess you could say, forward-facing units, publicly facing units. There's a lot that goes into the Old Guard, and so I was very proud of that unit when I went in, and it just so happened that I was in a very key position on September 11th and after, because I served in that unit to be a part of the response effort.
Wow.
That's awesome. So first and foremost, thank you very much for your service. You are a much tougher and better man than myself, and I speak for Shane as well. So seriously, thank you very much. So how did you end up at the Pentagon? Where did your story, how did your story bring you there, and what did you do there?
I'm going to show you guys quite a bit, because we talk in this podcast, you guys gentlemen talk about bringing things to real life out of that conspiratorial status. And so the means that I got to the Pentagon on 9/11, it's actually really interesting, because I can prove with my own military documentation that I was there, signed off by my regimental commander, my company commander, my platoon leader. But in the official documents, starting with the Arlington After Action Report, the Arlington Fire After Action Report, which also contains the FBI reports and a couple of other different agencies, you can't really get a really big grasp about how the Old Guard, this massive unit, got on site. So that's what I'm trying to find out, and what I've been trying to find out. And I think that I've been able to do that, and you guys are going to see that. But conveying that message has been kind of tough, because and as you guys are going to see here, it's not really readily available, and it's not really as easy to grasp. This part of September 11th, the Pentagon, so to speak. So we're definitely going to get into that in a lot of detail tonight.
Would you say you had an interest in conspiracy theories prior to the Pentagon?
Prior to my time on site, absolutely no. My I guess you could say, stepping into the mindset that these things could be possible came when I saw, years, becoming more years, the endless wars not stopping. Several years after the incident itself, I had friends killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And again, we're going to get into all this, but suffice to say, I did not believe that the United States government was capable of doing something like this to its own people. Prior to the event, that was something that I started to really believe afterwards. Now, I do have proof that the things that I'm going to be saying tonight, the things I'm going to be showing you guys, I've been saying these things for a long time. I've got witnesses that are willing to testify that, going all the way back to, I would say, 2007, 2008, 2009, somewhere in that kind of region. That's when I was saying these things. So not before the event, but after the event, when I truly started to study the American federal apparatus, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Department of Defense, the things that we're going to get into tonight, that's when my beliefs really started to change. And I subscribe to the opinion that our federal apparatuses at the highest levels have been totally infiltrated. So.
Yeah, it seems to be a recurring theme in a lot of the conspiracies that we dive into. There's got to be somebody operating behind the scenes, pulling strings, for lack of a better description, with a gun to the back of these people's heads saying, this is what you're going to say and do, or that's it. Like you're done, or you're going to be out of here.
Well, very soon I'm going to show a video clip. There's going to be 2 video clips that I'm going to show, and we're going to open up with the first one, and it's Tulsi Gabbard, an elected official, and she's going to tell you about her opinion of what the cabal is. And this is a recent quote, so I'm excited to unleash that.
I've been a huge fan of Tulsi lately. I'd say let's dive right in and get the show on the road. I've got a ton of questions. I want to save them as we kind of go through and throw them at you.
Yeah, so you guys, what I'm going to be basically doing here is I'm going to be showing you my why, really what drove me to these efforts, and we're going to get into a robust amount of information. If you're listening to this, I highly recommend that you go to a place where you can kind of pause and look into some of the things that I'm going to be showing on the screen and talking about, really dive into this stuff, and so I encourage that. But that being said, we're going to jump right in. If I have any technical difficulties, guys, between jumping back and forth, please don't hesitate to stop me. I'm going to try to jump over to Firefox here really quick. You guys see what is on my screen?
Perfectly.
Okay. Now, what we're going to do here is we're just going to have a very brief introduction. Tulsi Gabbard, of course, is talking a few weeks ago from today about who actually runs the government. And I think that's relevant because it shows that for quite some time, our government has been in a little bit of trouble. And so please let me know if you can hear this. Here we go.
Who actually runs the government, in your experience?
Not who you think it is. It's, and in many cases, especially recently, the troubling part about all this is it's not even people who we vote for. When you look at what happened when President Biden had that infamous debate with President Trump, it exposed the reality that many of us have known for a long time, which is that President Biden has not been the guy calling the shots. He has not been the guy making the decisions, nor has it been Kamala Harris, for that matter, nor will it be if she is elected president. It is this cabal of the Democrat elite, the woke warmongers made up of the likes of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and, Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and, people who are in the military-industrial complex.
People who are in the military-industrial complex. Remember those words.
Who profit from us being in a constant state of war. It is those in the administrative state, in the national security state, who derive more authorities and ability to take away our liberty when we are in a heightened state of crisis or war. It is their friends and billionaires and people in media who all derive their power from being able to have a figurehead that essentially they can control. And the most troubling...
So we could keep going on there, but suffice to say, let me get back to our screen. Let me put this one into slideshow. Okay, let me get back to our screen. Sometimes this can be a little tricky. I apologize. Okay.
No worries.
Good to me.
That was an elected official talking about our national government. And so she mentioned a lot of different things, the national security state, the military-industrial complex. That's the types of individuals that I am going to be exposing. And in doing so, I have to kind of get into the weeds about myself a little bit because, I guess you could say we'll get into it. But Yeah, we'll get into that. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right on in. Let me see. How do I change the slide here? I want to make sure I'm in full. How do I click the next slide? So when it comes to this subject, I always like to start with what we already know, not what we believe. And that really kind of speaks to the people that came before me on this subject and the people that really were pioneers. But I also like to talk about what the United States government has been capable. So anytime I talk about this subject, I always start with Operation Northwoods. And so, like Tulsi said, our government no longer represents the people, and it really consists of a different group. And it was one of my greatest enemies in the 9/11 truth movement that said, if you really want to understand 9/11, you have to work your way back to all these events that eventually lead to JFK. And eventually Operation Northwoods, because this was a military event that tried to basically go into play. General Leminster, he was the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He wanted this to go into play because we needed a reason to get militarily involved in Cuba back in the 60s. And so this is absolutely known. And so this general basically floated this idea. It got approved, green lighted all the way up to Kennedy. And he said that, they wanted to basically have Americans conduct false flag operations on Americans, make it look like Cubans were doing it, doctoring up airplanes, basically getting the intelligence apparatuses involved, doing a whole bunch of terror campaigns throughout the United States. And they did this because they basically did not want to give anybody the ability to land in Cuba and then have a jumping off point to attack us. So that's one place that I start, because you got to realize that, the people that are controlling the apparatuses right now, they're willing to do pretty messed up things. And so if you really dig into Operation Northwoods, you can kind of see that it's almost like 9/11 1.0. And, 9/11, the real 9/11 as we come to see it, was like really it was like Operation Northwoods in a sense. So you could get into this and spend a lot of time there. And I always recommend anybody really studying 9/11, go back to this event and study these documents and kind of take a look at what has been done, what has been written about it. Also, General Wesley Clark, shortly after September 11th, was talking about the scuttle that he witnessed personally in an interview. You can find General Wesley Clark's interview talking about the policy coups that were taking place. And in the weeks following September 11th, how he was up at the Pentagon and he was hearing all this talk about the multiple military campaigns that were being lined up throughout the Middle East and the world in places that had nothing to do with September 11th. And so we talk about Operation Northwoods leading to a reason to set the stage for military intervention. And this right there is evidence of that. So this man speaks about that absolutely out in public. Furthermore, there was a witness. I always say I'm not the first person that was at the Pentagon that really that challenged the official narrative. That was April Gallup. She gives a testimony, and there's several of them. This one can be found on Rumble. I took a screenshot of it. But she actually pushed her case to the United States court, and it eventually went to the Court of Appeals, where it was struck down. And you can look all this stuff up. But she basically, talked about the explosions causing the walls and ceiling to collapse on top of her, said that she did not think a plane hit the building, and was really the first person to challenge it. But I think she just took the wrong route. She tried to challenge it in court. And I believe that there was actually a member of George Bush's family that was also presiding over that original case.
What a shocker.
Yeah, exactly. You can look into all this stuff. Now, where it really starts to get thick, I say, you really got to start to get into the Citizens Investigation Team. That's a couple of guys by the name of Craig Ranke and Aldo Marquis. They launched an independent investigation back in 2006. And at their website, you can read you can watch their national security alert video. You can also see a ton of other evidence, interviews with tons of evidence, supplemental videos, and even a research forum where they defend their work and they get into the weeds of the videos and the work they produce. But really, what they are able to do is take a series of witness testimonies that basically show that the official flight path, which I've got my, my mouse going along here, and these different, light poles that were allegedly damaged, that they do not match up with a set of witness testimonies that talk about something else that was flying north of this Citgo gas station right here. Whereas the official narrative talks about the south of the Citgo gas station, how the flight, allegedly 77, Flight 77, Boeing 700, 200 series 757 plane, excuse me, it's kind of late at night, hit that building. So this is really where you have to start to get into the weeds. Furthermore, they've got evidence like this, these light posts that were taken down. They've got pictures of the crews that did it. They've got up close and personal, pictures right here, right in front of the building. If you think that, a flight hit one of these things, I don't know. I think that I disagree with you respectfully. But ultimately, they show that, there is remnants of a doctored crime scene. So I've always, prior to that, I kind of looked at their evidence and I thought, yeah, something absolutely wasn't right. But I didn't know how to go about ever bringing attention to the issue, but I just knew that there were other people out there that were trying to bring attention to it. There's another group. They're no longer with us, unfortunately. They're pilots for 9/11 Truth. My research partner has been able to resurrect some of their videos, and you can find them at this website right here. I've circled the ones that are really the most important. But the work that they also did, they took the work that CIT did, Citizens Investigation Team, and they basically took the analysis of the witness statements compared to that of the official narrative. And they started to get into their pilot math, and they provided basically a several-page document. I only listed a couple different pages here, but just came to the conclusion that it was impossible for any fixed-wing aircraft to cause the directional physical damage to the light poles, the generator trailer, and the Pentagon. It basically disproved everything. And we also know what, currently exists as far as Dulles is concerned. The 9/11, it's called the consensus panel. They're considered to be, one of the best evidence-based panels around, which is hysterical because I've been investigating those guys for quite some time, and let's just say I don't trust all of them. But even they agree that there is serious problems with the authenticity of the video that was given to us at Dulles. So they've gone into that. They basically saying that the claim was not supported by positive identification of any of these men by the Dulles Airport staff. That video was given to us years down the road. And furthermore, they highlighted that Dulles had over 300 surveillance cameras, and the FBI did not release a single image of any of those. And the unstamped images from the video don't provide any kind of data which is normally present in security, videos. And so therefore, this was a group of people, and these are people that I don't even agree with. They said there is no credible photograph or witness evidence that any of the alleged 9/11 hijackers were preparing to board American Airlines Flight 77, which crashed in the Pentagon. So going even deeper, they also agree as well that, two of the hijackers were sitting in first class. Well, ticket agent Brenda Brown, who checked in the first class ticket agents, ticketer passengers that day, remembered clearly checking in several passengers on a light day, but she did not recall any Arab males. So, then you can even go even further, and we can start pulling up a bunch of mainstream media, which I say mainstream media, I use their information kind of, you can't get too deep into it. I mean, I don't know if you guys consider the mainstream media a credible source anymore. But no. if you study Contour, they talk about how it was a total paradox, and that even months before he was in this position, he had failed to fly a lot of different other things. And then here in this article even said that his instructors became so alarmed by his skills that they notified the FAA to determine whether his license was even real. And, of course, these people are saying, they couldn't believe they'd even had a commercial license of any kind. So how was this guy that could barely speak English even allowed to get this type of licensing? Then even going, further, you can look this up on YouTube. We've got interviews with people that, saw him weeks before the attack. This gentleman right here worked at the Freeway Airport in Bowie, Marcel Bernard. He said, he flew 3 separate occasions. He talking about Hanjour. The second week of August in about a week's period. After those 3 flights, the instructors that had flown with him had informed him that his skills were so poor that they were going to insist that he do more flight training with us before they let him rent our aircrafts. And there's even another gentleman, Joe Gavro, that also offers on YouTube. You can see this testimony, and I bring the description up, but he, in the description of the video, point blank just says he was only interested in learning how to steer the plane, not to take off or land. His attitude was so bad that the instructors who flew with him said he wouldn't, one of the instructors said he wouldn't fly with them anymore. And so this is a Cessna. This is a Boeing 757-200 series airplane. So if he can't fly this and he's having trouble in taking off and landing, and there's a lot of other different testimonies that you can get into about Hani Hanjour, and I just have a really difficult time believing that he is going to be able to pull off the types of maneuvers that a lot of different pilots have come forward and said that they couldn't even pull off. So I try to bring all these things to the forefront before I even get into what I get into. And then, of course, there is my really dear friend and independent researcher, fellow researcher, Xander Arena. He's a member of American Mensa. I was able to find him later on down the line, and in these 2 videos that he did with a guy named Jeremy Sladen, a man who I've also spoken with, Xander basically publicly does his breakdown of the cameras that were provided by the federal government of that day and what happened. And Xander's been the first person to basically prove mathematically that what the government gave us simply is not legitimate. So I highly encourage anybody, if you want to watch these videos, it's, as you guys can see here, the first one's almost 2 hours long and the second one's an hour and a half long. Great stuff there. And I also like to bring attention to the witness statements that currently exist. We're not going to get into those really because they can be broken down in so many different ways. But suffice to say, I've been in a long project to gather all those witness testimonies, the ones that say that they saw the plane, the ones that say they didn't saw the plane. And I guess you could say that's one of the components that my writing work is really going to get into as well, is just breaking those down and showing just the very, very small group of people that actually say that they saw a Boeing 757-200 series commercial airplane hit the building. And then, even then, we're not going to do that tonight, but I challenge anybody that really knows the story to listen to those testimonies, because they're like little kids that are trying to get away with something. And almost, it's like, I don't know if you guys have kids, but it's like, yep, if they're trying to tell a lie, it's just listen to what they're saying and listen to their story. Yeah. So my research, we could talk about a lot, but that's one thing that I say. If you really want to get into the witness testimony, you can do that, but understand that use your discernment. But ultimately, what led to my efforts from 2005 to 2020, a lot was happening. There was the financial crises, 2008, 2009, 2010. Yep. That's when I got out of college. You couldn't find a job. It was very difficult for what I was looking to do with my life in public relations. You couldn't find a job. So jobs were very hard to come by. And I don't want to get too heavily into the weeds, but ultimately we did have an event that all of us did see. And, we can certainly talk about how information was used, how, groups of people were polarized. A lot has been, I guess you could say, shown to us in the last few years that truly, I guess you could say, delves into the globalist plan for us. Mm-hmm. And so I finally kind of took a look at what was happening in the world. And at this point in time, I had pretty much lost faith in the federal apparatuses. I saw the madness that was out there and just working its way into the world.
That one always gets me right there, that image.
Yeah. I saw a bunch of different incidents and just how, basically, everything was falling apart. And I finally just kind of said to myself, if it was going to happen, it would, if the United States was going to come down, it would look something like this. I mean, we've got elections that are openly being challenged. Our debt at the time, back in 2020, was skyrocketing. A lot of polarity. Just the debt was not going down under Trump, under anybody. And then we've got, I don't want to really get into a political, argument with anybody, but we've got this man who's supposed to stand for liberty, ushering in Operation Warp Speed. And then in places, you started to see this vaccination requirement. And that is basically when I said game over. At the end of December 2020, and you can see this screenshot from my Instagram, I basically just looked at a world that was burning. And I said, enough. I'm going to start to attack the September 11th issue. My heart had been calling me to attack that issue for a long time. And I think if people are kind of awake to what's happening in the last few years, especially to what people that, like Tulsi Gabbard is now saying to us in these interviews about the cabal, I just kind of said to myself, if people are awake to what's happening, they're eventually going to be working their way back. And eventually they're going to get to September 11th. But
that's
even
such a
when
good point.
Yeah, and they should stop then and see that was the catalyst for so much. But like I said, there was one of my greatest enemies in the 9/11 truth movement that basically told me that you got to go back even further. Yeah. But what people, I guess, you don't understand about me is that there's a much deeper why to this than just September 11th. And then this is where I kind of have to go in a little bit of a different direction. And this might not make sense, but it's relevant, and I think you guys will see why in a second. But, the military was taking actions as a result of that day and the things that occurred. And the gentleman that you see here on the left is a great man that I knew. He was killed in Iraq. And then the gentleman that I also knew on the right was killed in Afghanistan. These were two guys that I served with. And so that was several years down the line. And so, we went to war based on lies, and that's just my humble opinion. But, getting justice for those sacrifices is also there. This was also me right here. This was when I was a sergeant in the old guard. I handed off a lot of flags. I performed a lot of burial detail. Those conversation and those faces that I saw, those haunt me. Those people, there is nothing in my life that has ever come close to the types of moments that I would have right in these moments. You can't mess those up.
That's terrible.
Yeah. This is me on a casket team. I carried a lot of caskets in Arlington. There was a lot of stuff going on. But then we also did Dover missions. These guys this is, much after I left. The media was not allowed to take pictures of these types of things while I was there. But we did these types of missions. We pulled these types of bodies off the planes. These were people that had been killed, and then their remains were transferred from Ramstein to here. But a lot of stories that nobody tells you about how these boxes, like the ice that was holding these bodies in these caskets, how they, the ice would melt and they would kind of seep through these boxes sometimes. People would have remains in their gloves. We would always take them to this place, the Charles Carson Center for Mortuary Affairs. This is up at up in Dover at the Air Force Base up there. And it always seemed that whoever we were with, it was mostly a flag officer. Whenever we were receiving bodies, a general had to be there. And there was always like a tour taking place. And I thought that was always a little jacked up. I mean, you can see the caskets and the types of facilities, but then like they were processing bodies. And like, I'll never forget, like we would walk past this room right here, and I'll never forget this, like seeing, this room filled up with just remains. I mean, it was something that never escaped me. So that also drives me. So there's a lot of things that are deeper. But 9/11 oral histories also begin with a backstory of the witness. And if 9/11 was an inside job, then I have to clear my name. And so I always go deep into my family because it goes without saying. People look at my last name. They're like, oh, Eisenberg. Well, Israel, they had involvement with 9/11. You must be a shill, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, okay, cool, fair play. So in my research, I do show, and I got this from 23andMe. I went and spit in the cup and mailed it off to them. I do have that in my family, but it is in my dad's side of the family. And ultimately, I take that back to there, and I show that my great-grandfather was taken into custody by the Germans. And so, good luck saying that I'm a shill. My grandfather served the Army Air Corps. His brother served. He narrowly escaped with his life at Pearl Harbor. My dad served in Vietnam. He narrowly escaped with his life. And then on my mom's side of the family, this is from Ancestry.com, we've got family that go all the way back to the Revolutionary War.
Oh, wow.
Additionally, World War II, my mom's side, we had 9 people. Whoops. Sorry about that. I don't know why this is acting a fool.
You're good.
That just went away. But we had 9 people serve. There we go. And then you can see on the right side here, about halfway down, W.J. Sherrill. He was killed that day at Pearl Harbor. So we've got a lot of family that, was military-minded. And so, if people want to make the claim that I'm some type of an Israeli shill because they see my last name and think that well, it's Jewish, whatever, good luck.
Did your father or grandfather ever try to stop you from getting involved in serving for the U.S. military?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the first time I brought my father this recruiting packet from the Marines, and he's like, absolutely not the Marines, not the military, but not the Marines. And my mom threw me out of the house, believe it or not, when she found out that I enlisted into the Army. But
wow, okay.
I told them, and I went into the Army eventually. But they were not very happy. But at the same time, it was before 2001, and so it was, or before 9/11. It was a different time, so they weren't too scared. But
yeah, well, just having gone through what they went through, that's the only reason I asked. My father was a cop. He served as a police chief, and when he had retired, his dying wishes to me and my brother, please never, ever, ever go and be a cop. Number one, you'll be hated, but number two, it's more corruption and politicking than you'd ever believe. And that's why he had retired at that time, was because just the politicking was absurd. The corruption was getting crazy. People were hating cops. And this is, back in the 1990s. So I was curious if it parlayed over that way.
Oh, yeah. They certainly, felt that way. They weren't wild about me, and especially being an infantryman. They said, you can really do anything with your ASVAB score. What would you like to do? And I was like, I'd like to jump out of planes and shoot things. My dad
I want to do
like,
the cool shit.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And jump out of airplanes and all stuff. My dad was like, I get it. My mom was so wild about it, but oh well. But I also, when I do my talks, I like to bring evidence about myself, and so that comes in the form of military documentation. So I encourage anybody to pause this stuff. I've redacted the Social Security number, but this shows the most important thing right here that I'm circling, September 11th to the 30th, and these different bullet points right here, which I've highlighted over on the side. Just serving in heavy and light labor next to the different agencies that were on site, however we were needed in an environment that was considered hazardous. So that's really what it boiled down to when we were there. And this is also my, let me see, is this my achievement medal? Yep, this is my achievement medal. This is the back of it. I apologize. I thought this was a different document. So just to show you guys, this is the full documents. Nothing has been, messed with. These are my company commanders. I'm not making any of this up. Furthermore, this is the actual award that was given to me. I received the Army Achievement Medal for my time from September 11th to the 30th on site during Operation Noble Eagle. The Army also loves to give out a bunch of useless shit, so they love, certificates of achievement. So you better believe that we got one of those too. Now, this looks a little bit messed up, and that's because I lived in Old Town, Virginia, and Hurricane Isabel actually flooded the house I was in at the time. So these are original documents I was able to save. So that explains all that stuff. All apologies, but they are authentic. But a month after the event, we were asked to retire the flag. This is me right here at the ripe age of 20, doing just that with other members from Alpha Company, 3rd U.S. Infantry. This is our platoon leader. This is James Jackson, our Military District of Washington commander. And so, I was there. I even go so far, even though my name was spelled incorrectly, this was the award that I received, my Army Commendation Medal for getting out of the military in 2004. I received this medal. But bullet point number 1, it even talks about the flag ceremony. They said November 2001, but I was at the Pentagon. And so I say these things because a lot of efforts for the last few years have been made in some circles, some very small circles, to try to discredit me. And so every time they try to do that, it's it forces me to dig deeper. So here's my DD-214. This is the holiest of holies. This is what you get when you get out of the military. You can see here, I got my little stamp, and it talks about all the things that I did, honorable discharge paperwork. But then, going even down further, I was able to find how my unit got on site. Because like I said before when we first started talking, this stuff is not in the official documents. And so I say, look at the attack at the Pentagon, which is the medical response to 9/11, done by Mary Ellen Condon Rawle. And I try to underline everything here so they say, people can see it. Chief Schwartz and Agent Combs coordinated efforts with Major General George Weldon, the on-site military commander, and with Major General James Jackson of the Military District of Washington. Now, you guys are going to see that name right there. Remember that name, George Weldon, and remember, obviously, this name, James Jackson. It's going to make sense. But digging even deeper into that same document, Colonel Arroyo and Sergeant Sepulveda went to the roped-off section of the crash site where Commander Schwartz, Police Chief John Jester, Fire Chief Randy Gray, and other key personnel, including General Van Alstyne, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Military Personnel, and the Commanding General James Weldon were standing to discuss the situation right on the lawn. General Weldon took action almost immediately by requiring that General Jackson activate the Military District of Washington, one of 19 commands of the U.S. Army. And then right down here, I kind of skipped, Jackson provided about 100 soldiers from the 3rd U.S. Infantry for the recovery operation, and he also asked for a tent that was going to be used as an operations center for his soldiers who were to join the recovery effort at 4 o'clock that afternoon. And so you can't find this stuff. You have to dig through it. It's insanity. But that same exact general also talks about the efforts of the old guard on a C-SPAN interview on September 14th. You guys can find that as well. But there's also other documents and other books that go on and on and on about the old guard and what we did. This one specifically, Then Came the Fire, is great. Now, this is hysterical because somebody saw this in a presentation that I gave and said, well, Adam's company commander said that they got a mission to go on the 12th, and so Adam said he was there on the 11th, so he must be lying, stolen valor, look into him, oh my God. And it's like, no, I was advanced party, dude, chill out. But I say these things to show people where they can actually go to get legitimate information. And so, this was Captain Besterman. He was the Alpha Company commander. This is a close-up. Shoot, I did it again. I tried to use my mouse. This is a close-up of the back of my achievement medal showing Besterman's signature. And he also said, hey, great job by a stud new soldier. So, Lieutenant Colonel Tracy Bryant, he was also the deputy commander of the old guard. He talks in the book about how we got to the site, even in Arlington County's after action report, which this document, we're going to get back to it. This is supposed to be the pinnacle, document. You do a search for the old guard, you can find us in there. It talks about how people drew constant inspiration from our actions. And furthermore, how we assisted the FBI. And, it talks a little bit about what we were doing. These people right here, these suits, this was basically us. We were these guys doing that stuff. So you can even find us in some other documentations, the Pentagon 9/11's Defense Study Series, which I'm also going to show you guys why even these documents, while they look very official, they're done by the Historical Office of the Secretary of Defense. Even these documents that go into extensive length don't even get it right. But they do, if you look through the third, for the 3rd U.S. Infantry, the old guard, you can find that we were there. Furthermore, you can also look into the Novak archive using the Wayback Machine, and you can find a huge, 300-page document that contains a bunch of oral histories from people that were being interviewed on site. So I highly, highly recommend, if anybody wants to get into that, you can look and find these things. So really, I'm here to add to the puzzle. That was a long, 20, 30-minute conversation getting to what it is that really happened, how I got on site, why my research is different, the things that I exposed. But I have to list all those things to you guys because the things that I'm going to be saying are going to shake the snow globe a little bit. So I say these things to you guys because a lot of people are out there trying to influence the 9/11 truth space, and these people don't have they've got opinions, but none of them were actually there. And so, we can get into all that later. But my 9/11 timeline was really a series of anomalies, and starting really with before we were ever even on site at the Pentagon. We were actually over at Fort Myer preparing for a show that was called Spirit of America. It was one that my company did every single year. It was a public outreach event. And so we were prepping for that. And, we had to get back to the base when we were under, the truth that we were under attack. Like we had to first make our way back to the base. And so we did that. And that proved very difficult to do so because the traffic was just horrendous. But when we did get back, the first thing we wanted to do was help augment the security on the base. And so we did that by assisting the MPs. And so they asked for volunteers. My hand went up immediately. As I said, I was kind of a private full of piss and vinegar. And so I went down to the arms room and I went to check out an arms room, an M16, and I was given a blank magazine just like this one right here without any ammunition. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget the words. I held up the magazine. I was like, specialist, I'm going out, I'm going out to guard the base. This does not have any ammunition. And he said, you guys have not been, authorized the use of live rounds.
What?
Yeah. And if you guys don't believe me, in the Novak archive, you can pull up a testimony from a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Yellett. He's a former Alpha Company soldier that served with me. Unfortunately, he is no longer with us. But you can see here in this highlighted portion, later that day, they performed guard duty in other parts of Fort McNair. When they did have weapons, the weapons were not loaded. So that was, I think, the first thing that really kind of made me scratch my head.
That's insane.
A lot of people were getting very patriotic on September 11th. I was not. I actually, if I'm going to be honest with anybody, and I've said this for years now, that was the day that I knew I could never make 20 years out of the military.
Wow.
Whoever made that decision not to give us ammunition out there while we were performing guard duty, highly suspicious, really terrible decision. But I've been trying to find out who the call that was, and I have not been able to do that to this day.
So, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I think something that just came to light for me, and so I've never served in the military. I don't have any family that has ever served in the military. I'm going to venture to guess that a lot of people out there, unless they're not as stupid as I, think that soldiers, at all times, you have a firearm, you have loaded magazines, and you're ready to go at any given moment, right? Like, in my brain, that's what I perceived it to be. Obviously, that's not the case, right? So you had to actually go and obtain a firearm. You had to go and get a weapon, and then you were given a weapon with no live rounds.
Well, technically, every weapon is kept in an arms room that exists at the barracks, and so we don't really keep track of those weapons. They're locked up. But the way that I look at it, at this point in time, I'm at this unit, and to get into this unit, you had to perform at a higher level than the average soldier. You had to have higher scores than the average soldier, and so I was assigned sealed delivered infantryman at this point. I had been through Benning. I had been through the process that this unit required me to go through to serve there. And so it's like, if I'm in this elite unit and I've been stamped and sealed, like, why are you withholding not only my ability to defend myself, but defend the base? So yeah, it didn't make any sense, except that one circumstance was the only time that we were asked to augment and perform security at Fort McNair. I specifically remembered also asking the military police officer, it was a really short Hispanic girl. I said, did they give you any extra rounds for your 9mm pistol? And they hadn't done that. So that was a highly suspicious thing. But that volunteering to augment the base is ultimately, I believe, what led to me being a part of that initial wave that went on site.
Sure.
And so, finding how I got there in the official documents is very difficult. It's not even in the 9/11 Commission report. Like, they don't even mention my unit at all.
Right.
Wow.
And so then you've got the Pinnacle documents that barely reference the unit. And so having to dig and dig and dig, and then finding testimonies like this that match what I was saying.
That's insane. So I want to highlight this for everybody real quick, because this is just absolutely mind-blowing to me, right? So it's September 11th. You've had attacks in New York City. You've had the World Trade Center occur. You've had the plane go down in Pennsylvania. The Pentagon has been attacked, okay? You're a soldier. You're in the Army. You're in an elite company. And you're asked to... Now, granted, the official narrative, especially at that point in time, is, hey, we've been attacked. We don't know what else could possibly occur, right? Like, and I remember back to that day, and I'm sure many people listening or watching around the world remember as well, like, hey, what else is going to happen? What's going to happen next? We don't know what's happening. So you're tasked with, hey, go and guard, protect the base, right? One of the most important things that you could possibly do as a soldier. And 100%. You're not giving anything, you're given no tools to actually protect the base. And so where my mind goes initially is, the folks that are in charge know that there really is no threat.
And that right there is and I'm glad you make that mention, because that's my point. And I don't think it was at the company level. I served people that I absolutely love, would do anything for. Still to this day, great officers, great people. But my question is, higher up in the food chain, at the higher up military district of Washington level, what was ordered then? And if you think this is crazy, just wait. This is just the beginning. But you're going to see that this is the first anomaly, and it makes no sense, and I have yet to get any answers. So
that's wild. Absolutely wild.
Wait. If you think
I'm inclined to think those answers aren't coming anytime soon either.
Well, they're going to have to, because I've got so many anomalies. So that's the first one. The second one, why were my company and I asked to sign non-disclosure statements before we ever went on site? So let me get this, and put this into perspective. I was part of the advanced party, and somewhere between then and the unit came down on orders in the 12th, I don't know when the whole entire unit, as far as I'm saying company, when I say unit, I mean company, I don't know when it is that everybody was brought on site, because the old guard had a lot of other missions going on. And when you look at the research documents, basically companies were filling in as they could. But my question is just, we're heading to this this major catastrophe, this incident of mass murder, terrorist attack, worst in the history of the country. Why am I having to sign a non-disclosure statement? Why is anybody? Like, we should be getting there and doing things.
Sure.
So that's fishy. It's kind of just, I don't know. I would love to see a copy of that non-disclosure. I don't have it, but still to this day, I wonder about that. But going to the site, and this is something that I've never really gotten too heavily in. I'm going to go heavier than I normally do with you guys. It was almost like a hurry up and wait scenario. Like, again, we know firefighters are there. We're trying to save lives. All this stuff allegedly happened. And we get there, and it was like we were posted up in this tent outside, and we're just looking over at the building. And at that point in time, it was in the early afternoon. People had been on site and working and doing all sorts of stuff. But I'm looking over at this collapsed portion. I'm looking over at the hole, and I'm thinking to myself, like, that doesn't add up. Like, I expected more. Of course, at that point in time, they'd been playing what had happened at the towers, like, all day long, all night long, and for several days. And you can there's a video project where you guys can actually go look at the mainstream media and do like a minute by minute breakdown of what they did for like the first 10 days. But I expected different. And when we got there, it was just not what I expected, and we were sitting back and we were like not doing anything. But once we did start to get in to the building, I guess you could say, that's when things started to not really make even more sense. And so I show you guys these pictures, and then I show you this diagram here, because that is supposed to be allegedly how the plane entered into the building. So you can kind of see what the wingspan, the length of the plane is supposed to allegedly kind of be. And you can see how it kind of came through. And this is supposed to be kind of a topographical picture of how it cut through all the rings from the E to the C ring and eventually left the punch-out hole on A&E Drive. Furthermore, I like to show this document because, I like to show that, the plane came in like this, allegedly, at this angle right here.
Okay.
When I was on site, this portion of the building is the portion that really fell. When I was on site, most of the stuff that I saw most of the time that I spent was up in the Navy Operations Center. It was in this area once it was cleared out, and then it was down in these areas and in other parts of, I guess you could say, other floors of this corridor. Like if you wanted to picture like the second, I couldn't remember exactly which floor it was, but we had a couple missions where we were kind of like above this portion right here. But really, for all intents and purposes, I operated on the first floor of this area. And the portion, what we're going to kind of get into in a second, what really stood out to me the most, what stood into my brain and what really kind of told me from the very get-go, it was like instinctively, intuitively, something didn't make sense. It was this room right here in the Navy Operations Center, these 6 individuals right here. So when we were doing what we were doing, I had a chance to see this crime scene before it was truly deconstructed. Mm-hmm. And, you can kind of see what the inside of the building looked like. Because there was cameras and pictures taken like this one right here, it's really interesting because pictures of the incident were highly, highly, highly off limits. And meanwhile, you can find ones like this. I don't know who took them, but they, this was us. This is what we were doing. We can't really identify these guys, but these are Tyvek suits. I'm assuming these are old guard soldiers, but we were basically cleaning up stuff. Some parts of the building looked like they were heavily damaged with fire. More pictures of us. There was a lot of water. Like the water, they were dumping so much water in that part of the building that like it was literally up to our calves, like and up to our knees, even like days after they were talking about the amount of water. But what you're seeing is really the kind of things that we saw. But it was ultimately that boardroom that really just screamed foul play, and I'll get into that in a second. But I at the time was thinking to myself, just I envisioned much more, and now I you guys can see. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I say these things, but now I know that there definitely was nothing, because we would need several key components of evidence, which we allegedly had, even though there's absolutely no traces of it anymore, and that's plane parts. But looking around, I mean, what you're seeing is pretty much it. It was like this, and I try to make it abundantly clear to anybody that was, whenever I talked to them, like, did not see any bodies that looked like they were on the plane, did not see any plane parts. And that's imperative. I mean, that's important because I down the line, and we're going to get to this, I had an experience where I had a professional working experience with Pratt & Whitney. That was one of 2 companies that outfitted the Boeing 757 or 700 series 757-200 series airplanes, their engine. There was them and Rolls-Royce. So I have credible experience down the line, and I know airplane engine parts, and I know just airplane parts. I had to work in a professional environment with them extensively. So, you never find these things. I can show plenty of testimony, and I'm going to get to it tonight, about how these things were allegedly taken out of the building, but making it just abundantly clear, everything that we saw, it looked like it was a person that was inside the building, working at the Pentagon. No sign of luggage, no sign of airplane wreckage, nothing. And the most, I guess you could say, craziest thing, and I have to go to an oral history transcript to back this up, to talk about what I saw inside the boardroom. This is the testimony that came from Arlington County's, Oral History Project. This was a firefighting captain at the Arlington County Fire Department, Captain Charles Gibbs. They interviewed him in 2006. And on page 18 of this interview, this is where he talks about what I saw. He said, just a few side notes that just enlightened to me and Chief Gray, particularly because we were at the heliport. A lady that works for the Pentagon works in the explosives area, and how explosives affect human behavior and things that happened, explained how the deaths occurred in the Pentagon. Because fire people reported they found people sitting at the table like this, just sitting there like they did not know. And she explained that the impact of the plane sent such a concussion inward that it sucks the air out of your system 100% immediately. She said that explains how they found people with no signs. That's what happens. She said it's instant just by the force, because they found probably a lot, just like they were sleeping. That was interesting to find out the reasons. She said that was a very common thing of how that happened. So going back to this sign, this is right here.
Okay.
And these people looked like they had fallen asleep in their chairs. Their bodies on one side were melted to like the chair. If you can see this chair that I'm sitting in, and their face would be melted on one side. On the other side, they had form, like it wasn't melted. Instinctively, if we encounter fire, a lot of us want to stop, drop, and roll. We're taught that
Sure.
at a young age.
Right, you're not going to sit still.
These people were all sitting in their chairs, all 6 of them. One of them had basically looked like this. The person that reminded me the most, or that stuck with me the most, was at the head, and he looked like my father. Like, that's what really made it stick the most. But one of these other people was like,
my goodness,
slumped down, and they were under the table, but they were all still in their chairs. And somebody that I had given a talk to had indicated that sounded like an exotic type of weaponry, like a bunker buster. And there's so many things that I can point to, and I'm not going to point at them now just because I've got a debate challenge hanging out there, and I'm in the process of writing about it. But this testimony right here from this professional in one of the most badass fire departments in the country. People don't really know how much of a badass company Arlington is. This is a captain talking about how even firefighters there didn't know what the hell they were looking at. And then they had to have some explosives expert at the Pentagon explain to the professionals about what they were seeing. Highly suspicious, makes no damn sense. And those images stuck with me for a long time. So I try to make that abundantly clear.
It sounds like that explosive expert is saying, though, that there is explosives, unless I'm completely misinterpreting that statement.
Well, right.
No. So, okay, now you're getting into it. So when I talked earlier about the witness testimonies that can be picked apart, one specific, there's several different things you can pick apart about them, but there's one area where it talks about multiple explosives and fireballs. And these are witnesses that were survivors of the actual section. So multiple explosions and fireballs. Highly suspicious. And even those rooms where the boardroom was, it showed signs of being burned in areas, but at the same time, it also didn't look like it had been burned. It was just wild to me. So it was how did those bodies get concussed? How do they, show signs with this really high heat? It was like there was a difference. These people had been melted. And there's testimony given by firefighters that even under the collapsed portion of the building, several days after, it was still extremely hot. So I don't know. That's one of the things that I've been saying. We can, if we even assume that it was a plane crash, show me any type of evidence where a plane crash caused, such high levels of heat several days after the event to where even first responders didn't know what the hell they were looking at.
Where have we heard that before, Tim?
Oh, it sounds a little similar to...
Where have we heard that? How is it possible that jet fuel can cause that high temperature of heat? Yeah. Interesting.
Oh, we're going to get to that. There are additional anomalies, but... So moving past September 11th, we were there from the 11th to the 30th I was there from the 11th through the 30th for approximately 240 hours. Other people in my company were there, some for the same amount, some for less. But we eventually left. We started to, do other things, go back to our mission of serving in the capacity that we did prior to the event. Then all of a sudden, you guys may remember, on September 11th, there was also a series of anthrax attacks, which have been linked to American labs, which is hysterical. But my company specifically, Alpha Company at Fort McNair, was the victim of one of these anthrax attacks. Now, what makes this so just crazy? There is no historical record of this. I use this document right here, which was used in as a lay statement for a VA hearing back in 2022 from one of my former guys that served with me. But shortly after September 11th, we were the victims of an anthrax attack, and there's no record of it. And so the FBI pinned it on one of their own, and this guy, of course, committed suicide before he could be apprehended. But a lot of my teammates and I were trying to think about why this event occurred and why there's no historical reference to the anthrax incident at Fort McNair. Some people think that they wanted to get into our mail, and they most certainly started to do that. They started sending our mail through a process where they were basically searching it for anthrax, and so it totally nuked the mail. It almost made it useless. But one of my other teammates said, they probably wanted to further kind of traumatize you guys. You guys just went through this incident, and then all of a sudden, here's another one. So it's like trauma on top of trauma, But the interesting thing is, no other company in the old guard got hit with anthrax. And furthermore, what I'm trying to find out is the different security measures that got put in place after the anthrax incidents. Because, anytime you're looking at problem, reaction, solution scenarios, they create these problems, an anthrax attack, and then they offer the solutions for you so that, they oftentimes get enriched. What I'm finding about the military-industrial complex is that there's different layers to crises, and people just get rich all the way down. So who knows what came of this? But I'm just trying to think to myself, why would anybody look at Alpha Company like we are a threat? Death to America, all this shit. Very suspicious, didn't make sense, still doesn't make sense. And I used this document in a federal court hearing for the VA, and they accepted it. So I don't know. Very strange.
I think they're trying to discredit you. I think if you go in there and you traumatize people enough, and then let's say they leave and they try to whistleblow down the line, well, this guy's suffering from PTSD. He saw some crazy things in there, and he had an anthrax scare right afterwards. I think he's just losing his mind a little bit, and then all of a sudden, everything you say, all they got to do is say it one time, and they've got it to back it up that you're at 9/11 at the Pentagon, you saw some crazy stuff, then you get an anthrax scare. Look, man, this is telltale size of it. This guy's a lot nuts, and then you disappear off the face of the planet because the media just lambasts you for that, and you're nobody.
Well, perfect segue. What you just said is a perfect segue into the next anomaly, my missing service records. So
your personal missing service records?
Oh yeah, just wait. This is great.
Wow. Okay.
So, fast forward, 2009, I was out of the Army, and I'll never forget what was said to us when we were being debriefed about the Pentagon. They basically just said, guys, it's a matter of when, not if, but eventually you guys are going to feel differently. And this guy, it stuck with me. He just said, it's a matter of when. And I'm like, I'm pretty intact mentally. I'm pretty good. Even back then, I thought to myself, if anybody was in my family in that building, I would want somebody like me to go in there and get them. And so, I don't know. I thought that was really intriguing. And I didn't experience that. This is where I have to be kind of vulnerable. Until down the road. In 2009, I started to just see things in my life that I wasn't really wild about. I was having some trouble with interpersonal relationships, and I was genuinely experiencing what I felt were the repercussions of a traumatic event. PTSD is real.
Sure.
So I went to the VA, and I said to them, hey, I want to get into the system. I want to talk to a specialist in this realm, because I went to a civilian counselor at that time, and this guy didn't know what in the hell he was doing. He was a family counselor. I think he was a social worker. but he never had worked with anybody that had PTSD. And so I went to the VA. Well, it took them 2 years. In 2011, they denied my claim because they said that they could not find any proof that I had served in the United States military, which is wild because in 2005 and 6 and 7 and 8, I used my GI Bill. So riddle me that. So in 2011, I got into the VA and they denied me, and so I had to start using lay statements to prove that I was even there, and I had to, of course, upload my official records. But then I also, down the line, years down the line, when I was still fighting the VA, this was the first one in 2017, so I'd been fighting the VA at this point in time for a long time, filed a records request, and of course, they couldn't, barely give me anything. I filed again in 2019, and once again they gave me some stuff from the MEPS, which is the Military Entrance Processing Center, station, and they gave me some documents from when I was at the Primary Leadership Development course. Really, that's been one of the other huge red flags. I'm now a 100% service-connected disabled veteran. It took me 13 years to get to this point with the VA, but having to fight for so long because everything is missing. Of course, I have my official documents. You've seen them in our presentation. Right. But if you make a request for these documents, they are nowhere to be found. So
was there anyone else in your company that had the same issue?
Oh, yeah, and I'm getting official statements from those guys as well. I was just about to say, thank you for saying it. I'm not the only person in my company that can say this.
Yeah.
So excuse my ignorance, but obviously you have the documents to prove that you were in the U.S. military. Does the VA not accept those documents?
Well, they did. They did accept those documents, but I also covered my tracks with the VA. I also gave them lay statements. So thankfully they did. And I also showed them that I made multiple requests, and so eventually they had no choice but to accept them. What was funny is that the process took 13 years.
That's insane.
Because they were dragging their feet, but they also were doing everything they could to not give me the help I needed, which my first, I haven't even talked about this yet. My first writing project is obviously going to be about this. My second project, after I put this issue to bed, is going to be an institutional audit of the Veterans Administration, because the funnel that we provide for warfare pales in comparison to the resources that we have waiting for those people that went and did the bidding of our politicians in our country. And I can speak to that. And so just showing the resources that aren't there, and just the chaos that exists for veterans that are trying to get help. Eventually, I had to work my way all the way up to my state official, to my congresswoman. She had to get involved, and thankfully, she was very helpful in all this. But so that's one of the anomalies that I'm also trying to get through. But now, drum roll, I've kept you guys waiting for long enough. The anomaly of all anomalies. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, what in the hell could this be? So here it is. Boom. This guy right here. His name is Carmen Lee Wheelbarger. Now, if we were going to
Sounds like somebody out of an Adam Sandler movie.
Oh, I wish
he fucking looks like it too.
Oh, I wish that he came out of an Adam Sandler movie. You guys are about to see a little bit different. Suffice to say, if we were going to have true mass murder, we would need people conducting it on the ground. And so I got to say, for purposes that I don't get sued, I would love to be wrong. I would love to come on this podcast and issue a full-scale, I'm wrong and here's why. But I'm doubling and tripling and quadrupling down that a real, legitimate 9/11 investigation where the paradigm is shifted starts with this man right here. And you guys are going to see how I stumbled into him, why it's relevant, how it's connected to today. And this is really where I think my research and my investigation really sets apart everything. I mean, I can only speak to the event about what I didn't see, and then people can say, well, other people said this, and then I'm kind of screwed.
Sure.
If I show them this and I show them this guy and his team and the other people, that becomes a little bit harder to deal with. And that's where I've been now for several years. So writing about this guy and showing the world how I found this guy is really paramount. So I talked a little bit earlier about how pictures of the event and videos of the event were highly off limits. Well, I've circled this man taking pictures of himself in front of the, somebody else was taking a picture of him, but then there are pictures where he is not so, I guess you could say, bashful, standing right in front of the damage zone. I've got pictures of his entire team, but I'm not going to release them. But just knowing that, these types of pictures are 100% not approved, not good. They were not allowed. I eventually got these from this gentleman's documentary on the subject, and we're going to get to how I arrived there. But a long time ago, back in 2021, I gave a talk much like the one I'm giving you now. I was very green on the subject. In fact, that picture of me came from my real estate days, where I was still present. I had just gotten out, I guess you could say, but it was still present. I was kind of in that space still. But I was invited to tell my story on this man's podcast. His name is Jason Shurka. I reached out to him at the advice of a person that was following my journey on Instagram. And lo and behold, he reached out back and said that he would love to have me. And on April 24th, I went on this show, and I was very green. I basically thought at that point in time, I was only going to have to talk about what I did and did not see, and that was going to be enough. And I was wrong, but it did lead to where my life's work now is, and this was the genesis of it all. So down in the comments section on that day, I took some screenshots, and you guys can see people started to mention this gentleman, Lee Wheelbarger, and this was one of them. This said right here, isn't Lee Wheelbarger the guy who was in charge of logistics support between September 11th and the 17th? I'm sure he was. I'll call him and see. Well, I then went to the Arlington After Action report, and I saw here that Chief Schwartz assigned Chief White the task of organizing logistics. Whatever they need, according to the chief, he said, he told the chief, you get it. So this gentleman trying to say that Lee Wheelbarger was in charge of logistics, that immediately got disproved. Some other people even then said that, like this guy right here, and 25 people liked it. Lee had a bunch of people, and I'll explain how we get to that. But, this guy thought Lee Wheelbarger was in charge that day. Well, again, going back to the Arlington After Action report, Chief Schwartz directs Chief White to establish the logistics section, and then, right here on the timeline, Assistant Chief James Schwartz arrives and assumes incident command. And so I just decided, I was like, well, the hell with it. I'm going to write this guy. And, Lee eventually said, in his old YouTube channel, he was called Inventor Lee Wheelbarger. And at the time, that was what, basically shortly after that day, he said, hello, Adam, please let me know what works for you and I will fit it into my schedule. And as you guys can see, I wrote back on that timeline saying, it's a pleasure to meet you. I would love to speak with you at your convenience. What would be the best way to get in touch? Here's my email address. Let's roll. Let's talk. Well, that same day, he was talking really nice there. That same day, our inventor was on his YouTube, which was actually a paid subscription, a paid news subscription channel, where he, calls himself KLW World News. At that point in time, his channel, you saw here, this is back then, had about 55,000 people. At one point, even this same channel was called Inventor Lee Wheelbarger. This was his personal channel, but he converted it to this KLW, which means Carmen Lee Wheelbarger, World News. I didn't know at the time. But I also heard that it could also be an acronym for him and his wife. I think his wife's name is Leanne, or I can't remember what it starts with an L. It escapes me. It's not important, but she teams up with them.
Sure.
I didn't know at the time, but he basically is saying, hey, I would love to speak with you. I'm being very respectful. And then the same day, he goes on and starts playing the Jason Shurka interview. And this is a screenshot of his live news channel. He offered basically a live news, briefing every single day, where he was this Department of Defense, former techno spook, just big time, in the know kind of guy. And, you know, where he was really nice before talking to me, you know, on Jason's page, he then started to blast me on his own news channel, where he even then, you know, went crazy, and he went to Jason's page, and you can see here, you know, this is down in the comments section, you know, I was there and your guest has no idea what he was talking about. Here is my video. Where is he? You know, where is his? I would be happy to debate him. So he challenges me to a debate, even though he's being extremely nice to me there, but he's going to Jason's video and saying these types of things while also just ripping me apart. It was wild. And you can kind of see in his live chat, you know, people were basically talking about me, and, you know, he was letting me have it. It made absolutely no sense. But then, you know, when I was learning about this guy and I was studying him down the road, I came to an article, and you guys can look up this research. It's called the 25 Rules of Disinformation. And so when I came across this research, this guy and his strategies really started to make sense. And so if you're watching this, I would highly recommend, for your own just knowledge, understanding how these tools are used to get information past people, how to just push people to certain places, and how to break people down. Look into that. That's basically what he was doing to me.
So, Adam, question: this Carmen fellow, is he a government employee? Is he work in the private sector?
Both. And so I didn't know it at the time. I now know that he worked in both. Now, at the time, he was in the government sector, and ultimately, you know, he started making. And it's funny you say these things, because in that same exact video where he started to blast me on the day of the Jason Shurka presentation, he pulls up his resume, 30 years experience of RDT&E, of military electronics and weapons systems. You know, he used to work, and he basically goes down the line about all the things he did, all the places he worked, really gave himself away, started talking about, you know, his skills, his research, you know, the types of things that he is really an expert in. And so asking yourself, you know, okay, this guy was called to serve as a first responder, or at least he claimed he served as a first responder, as a firefighter at the Pentagon. Well, his expertise doesn't seem to be in firefighting. It seems to be in advanced weapon systems and a number of other things.
Yeah, it's a little odd that you would need somebody with experience on advanced weapon systems at the Pentagon at that point in time.
Oh, just wait, my friend. Well, in that same exact video, long before he started blasting me on that same news channel, I went back that night and I started to watch the whole thing. And 33 minutes in, I learned something about this guy. One of these people right here said, you know, by some chance, is there a relationship with Catherine Wheelbarger, U.S. Assistant Defense Secretary? Like, Lee, if you don't mind me asking, it was about a year or so ago. She was talking about Russia, because he was giving a talk about Russia. And at that point on that podcast, on his news briefing, right then and there, his words were, of course there's a relationship with Catherine Wheelbarger. So they share the same last name. So I was like, who in the hell is this woman? So I was like, okay, pause. Let's look her up. So that's exactly what I did. I come to find out that this guy, this is his niece, I'm pretty sure. I have been able to confirm that with him. I've seen that through YouTube posts where he talked about her. And so this was allegedly his niece. And remember, go back to the quote with Tulsi Gabbard about the cabal, the military-industrial complex, how these people work. This was the former Assistant Secretary of Defense, which this woman literally was one of the top people in the intelligence sector. We're going to get into that in a second. She served with Congress as a policy director from 2011 to 17 for the Senate Armed Forces Committee. Heavily into intelligence, the portfolio with John McCain. She served as counsel to the Vice President, Richard Cheney. This is the big connection right here. She worked directly with Secretary Chertoff. Well, I highly recommend anybody that's listening to this, go listen to anybody that's a geopolitical researcher surrounding the September 11th event and see what they say about Michael Chertoff. So this woman was one of the top foreign policy officials at the Pentagon, and in 2020 she resigned. I mean, I'm fast forwarding a little bit. I kind of broke out into a study about this woman when Lee Wheelbarger mentioned her.
For anybody not watching, she looks like she belongs in a tree baking cookies. She looks like a Keebler elf.
Yeah, she's an interesting one. Well, here's where it gets really interesting, guys. She was supposed to be pulled for a high-ranking position at the Pentagon, but resigned 6 days after having her name pulled for the number 2 intelligence role. So it basically said that the job was scuttled by the White House staffers over loyalty concerns to President Donald Trump. So if there was ever a question I wanted to ask Donald Trump, it's why did you pull this woman for loyalty concerns? Well, he didn't put her into that role. So here's what she did. She left. She went over to Lockheed Martin.
Oh, we know that name.
Yeah, exactly. So this woman that spent a lot of time, in all these positions is now a full-time, executive over at Lockheed Martin. And then when Biden came in May 26, we see her name. Oh, Biden, this peaceful president takes this war hawk and he nominates her for the United States Institution of Peace. Well, he didn't just nominate her. He then gave her privileged nomination, extremely fast nomination, right through everything, through the Senate executive calendar, bang, done, confirmed by the Senate vote. And now this woman still stands as a board of director member of this institution that was created by Reagan and a couple of different people back in the day, to observe and to promote peace. So it's like George Orwell said, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. This woman is a war hawk that got raised through the ranks. And I'm not going to, say that just because that person says, my suspect says he's associated with her. But, the military-industrial complex, I mean, this is how it looks. I mean, it doesn't matter who is in the roles. It doesn't matter. They're not serving. These types of people are put into these positions. The pendulum might swing politically, but these are the people that are calling the shots. These are the people that are directing policy, that are telling these politicians what to do. And who in the hell are they attached to?
Sure.
Tulsi Gabbard calls it the cabal. Lee Wheelbarger, and you guys are going to see more on him in a second, said that he had a relationship with this woman. So, at that point, I'm saying to myself, this guy attacked me. He's got all these ties. Who in the hell is this guy? So I really began to dig into him. And I saw that he was involved with a lot. He's got a lot of patents. He was involved with some different collaborations. He had his own, paid news source where he's, going around basically offering news on the world from the DoD techno spook like expert opinion. So he was going around offering a lot of different ways to get his word out, which was really shady in my opinion. He had a lot of different YouTubes at that point in time. He no longer has that top one with 58,000 people. But you could see down here at the bottom in one of his channels in his heyday. I mean, this is the channel that is right here. 10.5 million views. It had been around since September 8, 2009, and, quite a bit of uploads. So I believe, that, we are experiencing kind of a battle for perception right now, and that ultimately the globalist goal is to get what's in between our ears, and that's our minds. And if they're going to do that, they've got to have people that are trusted, that have earned the trust of the globalists in a lot of different ways, that are now misinforming people. And I go back to even other people like Yuri Bezmenov, the former KGB escapee that basically in the 80s was giving talks about how Russia was planning on changing the United States.
Yes, I knew that name somewhere.
Yeah, by subjecting us to this just this massive amounts of disinformation to where you get so subverted that you can't even decide what is reality and what isn't.
He was the dude that kind of laid out the plan for how the Russians would eventually, over a very long period of time, take down America through, to your point, disinformation and just extreme division and just implanting all these far... I will get political here. Far left radical ideas, these Marxist socialist, wacky, bullshit things that don't work.
Yeah, and so, my theory is simple, and you're going to see more evidence on this guy, but, if a 9/11 investigation was truly supposed to, begin, it could be then said that it could begin with this guy, but then years down the road, he's showing additional motive, and that motive is to dis and misinform. So what better way to do that than to position yourself as this expert spook and offer, up-to-date news, which is funny because, eventually I was able to remove this. I challenged him in one of my podcasts not very long ago, and I was able to remove his biggest YouTube channel. So I kind of wanted to share that. I was really happy about that recently. But so now he's got a little bit less of a YouTube. But there's other things that this guy is doing, and this even goes back to when I first started to investigate him. He basically uses a lot of different ways, like Buy Me a Coffee, Rumble, YouTube. He's had a Patreon account to get people to his series of bullshit that he's trying to sell them. And people are paying for it. And you can see here that just in the last few months, he's been hitting his membership pretty hard. He was charging $5 and $10, and he had 861 people. He's now going with 10 and 20. This was even a couple months ago. I put this presentation together, and his membership has been increasing. So as shit happens in the world, this guy is effective. And you can also now go into his Rumble.
What are we doing wrong?
What's that?
I said, Shane, what are we doing wrong, dude?
This guy is now.
We're the good guys.
Yeah, well, and you can see he's presenting this news on a nightly basis. You guys can go watch this stuff. My investigation is still active, but hundreds of people are watching this guy present news on World War III and throughout his different Rumble and YouTube channels. You can see this very pro-Ukrainian, very pro-Zionist, very pro-Ukrainian message. We're going to get to all that in a little bit other ways, but this is his X, his Twitter, which he has blocked me from. He did have a different one, but at one point in time, but they suspended him. But just showing you guys just the types of ways this guy operates. That was, I kind of gave you guys a grand scheme of things of what he's doing now, but go back to what, to the Jason Chirka days. So I investigated this guy for a month. And I came to the conclusion that he was bad news. He espoused the official narrative. He didn't like to be challenged in any way, shape, or form. And he could be easily angered. And so April 24th is when I first came across this guy. May 24th, 2021, I decided that I was basically going to rattle his cage. And I did that by going back to all the comments on the Jason Chirka video. And you can still see these comments. Anytime Lee was mentioned, I basically said, Lee has been ducking me, and I took screenshots of these. I just said,
Love it.
I thought we were going to arrange in time to speak, and I just went down the line and said, he has had my information for a month now. Look at the thread. I still haven't heard back from him. Well, lo and behold, again, another one. These are all still available. Lo and behold, at that exact same time, wouldn't you know it, and I got so lucky, he was giving a live broadcast on May 24th when I was talking shit and questioning him. And in that live broadcast on May 24th, between the 2-hour and 46-minute mark and the 3-hour and 58-minute mark, that is where my world changed. That's when I realized that I had stumbled onto an individual that was not acting right. It's very simple. We're all entitled to our opinions. If you were there, great. Tell me how you got there. How are you authorized to be there? And why are you attacking me? And furthermore, if this guy is the director of logistics and he served in such a capacity, and I can prove that he did, he served in quite a bit of roles there, and I can show you guys this, and we're going to get there. Why was he saying that I wasn't there? Why was he making no mention of the hundreds upon hundreds of Old Guard soldiers that were there? So this video is no longer live because he crashed his YouTube channel. I gave a presentation on the Free Thought Project a few months ago, and I basically told this guy that I was about to do that. And shortly, after I gave that presentation, that's when he flooded his page with third-party violations, and that's when I basically took it down. But when that went down, all of these videos went down. Now, thankfully, I have them saved. But the next level of what I'm going to be doing is basically dissecting a series of videos. And I'm sharing this with you guys. And my team knows this, and people that I've given collaborations know this. But I'm basically going to be breaking these different videos where he is spoken down. And kind of like in the movie A Few Good Men, when, you know, Jack's on the stand and Tom Cruise kind of like nudges him and kind of, you know, it's like that fly that keeps buzzing at him. He finally goes off and he gives himself away and he incriminates himself. Well, Lee has essentially done that with me on several occasions, and it started on April 24th, but then it continued a month later. So at this point, he repeated several lies about me, once again challenged me to a debate, which is funny because he's ran for me 7 times, 8 times now, questions my honor, and he continues to deploy, you know, rules of disinformation against me. So that was May 24th. Well, September 10th, 2021, I decided that I was going to do on my Instagram account a pause and play breakdown of this interaction, and that's exactly what I did. If you go to my Instagram, it is still available, and I showed this guy, you know, I showed the people for what this guy, you know, for what it was worth. I tagged him. He's still on Instagram. I offered him to basically come defend himself, and you guys can see here, you know, I put it up. It had several views. It was getting attention. It had 4,000 views, and that's when he showed up. You know, I said, hey, you're live on this thread. And that's when he basically started to say, you know, you need to go get some mental help. You really need it, you know. And then he started to say that he had no idea who I was, even though, you know, he had been basically going off on me all these times later. He was saying to these people, you know, on September 10th that he had no idea who I was when I just did a pause and play assassination of him, you know, the day before the 20th anniversary. Well, I did that because the next day, Lee himself, on the 20th anniversary, was going to introduce his timeline. It was a documentary that he had prepared, and this was on his channel for about 2 years now. It's no longer live. I have copies of it. I'm going to be doing a breakdown and releasing of it, but as you guys can see, on that day, September 11, 2021, he did a huge documentary, and he basically shot himself in the foot and the ankle, the knees, the legs. In doing this, he basically blew himself to smithereens. And that same exact day, as you can see here, I went live on my Instagram, and I talked about how fucking happy I was, pardon my language, that he had just given all that information to me. And so
your smirk says it all in that screen cap right there.
Game, set, match. My cup runs over. And that was back in 2021. So fast forward then. He challenged me and said that if I ever challenged or wanted to debate him, that he would do it at a moment's notice. Well, another friend of mine and I conducted what we called Operation Tina, and it came from, you know, the movie Napoleon Dynamite. And he's like, hey, Tina, come get some ham. I joke, but we called it, you know, I'm a former military person, so we all in the Orion Project have call signs. We all, you know, everything is an operation. We have fun with it. Well, on December 5th, I was able to infiltrate into a live newscast that this guy was giving. And as you guys can see here, you know, there was 100 people. I mean, several hundred people, a couple hundred people. It was fluctuating. But I was like, let's go, dude. You know, I once again was trying to get this guy to debate me. He said before that if I ever wanted to debate him, he would stop his news channel live and go there with me. And in this moment, he faked a medical emergency and he exited. And so at that moment, I was like, I got him.
Right.
And so, you know, like I said, it all boiled down to this guy having that one moment in time where he was eventually going to just own me, and it never came. And to kind of prove to you guys, you know, these are screenshots from his page. You know, this was a video, the manhunt video was on December 4th. You know, this second video was also on December 4th. And then the next video that he uploaded was on December 10th. And so this was on December 5th. And so he did not save it. So that kind of further confirmed that he was doing everything he can to hide from me and run from me. And so I said, you know, why didn't he save that broadcast? Well, the very next day, December 6th, you know, I started to basically show people and talk to people on Instagram about what had just happened the day before. And then he showed up on my page, started talking shit, telling me that I'm full of shit, all this stuff. It's always just basically disinformation tactics, cussing, anger, outrage, all this stuff. Well, finally, this guy said back then, he said, "You're full of shit. Show some proof that you were there at the Pentagon and that a plane didn't hit the Pentagon." And so I went and I said, "Okay, then you got it." And so at that point, I announced to the world, we're going to go there. And lo and behold, December 6, 2021, I did a second pause and play breakdown of one portion of his 8-hour and 45-minute 20th anniversary pile of bullshit. And in that, I pointed out some of the things that he said about damage to the building and how that damage got there, and specifically what caused it. And he specifically mentioned this item that's circled called a circular scuff mark, and he claimed that an engine rotor created that. Well, in order for that to happen, and he specifically said that engine rotor, that he himself got that and was like getting pieces and debris off the lawn, making claims that just absolutely defied physics. His 20th anniversary documentary, it was hysterical. It was like the Battle of the Bulge. It was pathetic. But I did a small breakdown of that, pause and play breakdown, that's still available.
What did an engine rotor plow completely through that? And or at least cause more damage than just the scuff mark on the side of a building?
Well, that's the thing. In order for that rotor to even get to that point where it individually could do that, it would have to be separated from everything else. And those engines weigh thousands of pounds.
Right.
They're very dense pieces of equipment, and
right.
That's dry. They weigh
right.
thousands.
So you're talking, you're talking about something going in with extreme velocity, weighing thousands of pounds, and creating a scuff mark on a building that looks like somebody power washed it.
Oh, yeah, and let's not even talk about the fact that commercial airplanes aren't even capable of flying that speed at that low.
Right.
Yeah, so this interview, as you guys can hear, is important because it talks about how Lee Wheelbarger was escorted off the scene by James Schwartz's assistant. James Schwartz said that this guy was with another agency, a federal agency that didn't have a stake in what was at play there, and they weren't a part of even the emergency response efforts that were a part of that agency. So this guy Lee is making all these claims about his arrival, and I'm going to be going in and doing a very significant pause and play video series this year and into the next, talking about all these different clips that we're talking about, But this man, according to James Schwartz, the incident commander, the fire chief that was in charge of the scene for Arlington Fire, threw him off. So on February 6th, basically, I was able to get that. I was doing some research into somebody else, into this individual that runs this podcast, because I consider him to be a disinformation peddler. And it just so happened that he was able to actually interview that guy. So I took that piece of information and I went to Lee Wheelbarger, and you can see here, I just wrote to him on Twitter at the time. I just said, "I have James Schwartz on record point blank saying you were escorted off the site from the Pentagon. You're full of shit." I had to throw that full of shit comment in just to rattle him a little bit. And I said, "Why do you continually lie so much about your involvement there?" And I just told him, I'm close to, it's close to being completed. And what it is, I'll be asking you questions in front of podcasts you can't ignore. And I'm starting to do that now. I went on a pretty big podcast recently, and about a month and a half ago, and I started saying this man's name. And he, of course, his response, according to him, was that he was returned to site after being removed. So that confirmed that Schwartz had him removed.
Yeah.
He also said publicly, according to him, that he was escorted off the Pentagon because of a mix-up with his ID, which is absolutely not true. So I've got the incident commander on record saying that this guy was not supposed to be there, had no authority, even though this guy was doing a lot of stuff. And I'm going to show you guys that. But you can also see he told me to go fuck myself and called me a stupid fuck. And then, that was April 14th. And, of course, the hits keep coming. When that message went down, he was in the middle of a live audience, per usual. And at this point in time, at the 29-minute mark on April 14th of this newscast that he was giving. He, of course, showed that he blocked me. This was my old Twitter account. But he continued to talk then about pre-authorization, his teammates, the evidence that he handled, the command structure that he kept on time, his timeline. He offered more lies about me. And so there's a lot of other different things that I'm going to be breaking down. But I just wanted to show you guys that over a series of interactions that spanned several months, and it's now gone into years, I've been playing chess with this guy. And even today, evidence continues to show up. This was David Harris Jr. He's a conservative influencer. He talked about, how there was no evidence to show that there was an attack at the Pentagon. He said, one question, where's the plane? He put a video up, and lo and behold, it's a video where it seems like Lee is the star of the show being filmed by the cameraman. And it also starts to show his other people. But Lee loves to brag. And we find when we study mass murderers that that's the case. They just love to brag. And so this was taken down the line as well from Lee's own news channel. So if he was thrown off of the Pentagon grounds by the incident commander, James Schwartz, why then, and this isn't even correct, Lee said that he was given a tour to the Virginia governor on the 12th. This was several days after the event. But if he's a nobody that was removed, why is he giving a tour of the Pentagon grounds to the Virginia governor?
Sure. And also, what the fuck is he driving?
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, I was just about to talk about that. So that right there, I was about to say, why is he driving a Super Cat vehicle? What that is, that's an English military vehicle. And I actually have record of this guy on record bragging about how he was able to get that thing past the Department of State simply by converting it to a firefighting truck, by attaching some alarms and shit to it, and putting some firefighting gear on it. So, good question.
Interesting.
I used that in my research because that guy pulled that and plenty of other gear across the country in a very quick amount of time. But furthermore, in January 2015, Lee, on his webpage, put pictures of him training with Ukrainian Spec Ops guys. This is also, this guy right here is the head of Ukrainian military intelligence. I don't know his name, but Lee was very, very cocky and bragged about that. And so, like I said before, this expert offering us this news is now visiting these parts of the region where a lot of shadiness is coming down the pike.
Right.
Why is he over there? What are his connections? What is he doing? What's driving him? What's his lawyer? Lee also said that this is his attorney right here, his personal attorney. What is he doing over there in Ukraine with a bunch of Spec Ops guys and, chilling, firing weapons?
Holding what looks to be, I don't know, is that a mortar?
Yeah, that's a rocket.
Yeah,
rocket launcher. Cool, So yeah, this man, he's aged a little bit, but now, he's currently in this role where he is providing expert news, and he's now driving around a nice, upgraded news van called the Intimidator, where he's giving these updates and visiting places and going places and talking about World War III. And recently, on one of his Twitter accounts, I saw this. So, is this real? Does he have a helicopter? Is he getting a helicopter? Who's funding all this shit? So is he a firefighter? Is he a techno spook? I don't know, but what I can tell you is that for all the tens of millions of views he's got, on every single one of his videos, it has this disclaimer. It says that he is dedicated to providing real news that you can count on. And then it basically says, real news, and then, down even further, it says, notice, nothing in this broadcast is live. All content is like live. This is a live action role-playing game for entertainment purposes. And he says, of course, he puts it up there for compliance with YouTube guidance policies or community guidance guidelines policies and censorship policies. But I think he's really doing that as kind of a way to cover his own ass. There's a lot of other evidence that I'm going to be dissecting. And his old channel, as you guys can see here, he did an 1.5 hour long video where he offered a ton of pictures And that's where he started to if you zoom in on these pictures, that's where I got a lot of them. This is the one with him and the governor. This is one where he's on site, another one where he's on site, a video where he's on site. I've been basically dissecting everything that this man has been saying about the event. And furthermore, I've got him being basically discussed on this old show called Modern Marvels, where they talked about his abilities with weapons and how he could be doing very good things and very bad things. And it talks about how he owned the Mount Hope Training Center. And in this video, like, it showed him training some of our Spec Ops guys. Furthermore, he's got his own video, which he used to have uploaded to his social media. This is video evidence of him surrounded by old guard soldiers, where he was stopping and starting the operation and doing things on site, taking part in the shoring up activities, in the recovery of remains and stuff. Well, this picture in this video, if you watch this video, it directly goes against what James Schwartz said about this man and what he was doing. This man was actually there. And while James Schwartz, and this is where I can't really go because this goes into completely other direction and stuff that I've read and I could show you guys, but James Schwartz talked about how the FBI was essentially setting up the Joint Operations Command Center off-site at Fort Myer, and how he was going to these meetings off-site. And that's a major question that I would love to ask the FBI. It's like, why didn't you set up your command center there? But while the incident commander James Schwartz was away, it's almost like that's when guys like Lee Wheelbarger were, given carte blanche access to do whatever the hell it is that they were doing to cover it up and to cause chaos. And that specific quote that James Schwartz talked about in the Darkened Hour talks about these efforts and how these people were essentially trying to tear the scene down. It's not. But I'm going to be dissecting that. And you can make a difference if you guys, all of you that are out there watching this, he still has these different YouTube channels. I recommend that you go there and you mention me and you get him talking about me. Because if you get him talking about me, I would love to hear about it. So send me a Instagram message or an email to my email address, and that's eagle@orionproject911.com, because I want to record what this guy says about me. But currently, I'm blocked. He talks a lot of shit about me, but he refuses to ever engage me in any sort of public debate. And that right there is the anomaly of anomalies. But if you can imagine, I know it's late, I'm not going to try and get this to drag on for too much longer. There is more. So exposing Lee Wheelbarger is not the end of it. There's also a Veterans Administration. What's that?
No, I was just going to say, with Lee, where do you think, to summarize, where do you think his role exists? Do you think he's working for a particular agency? Do you think he is one of those contractors that just happens to have top secret clearance, which is why he's able to be on the Pentagon, and other military personnel that had significantly more clearance than the average person just didn't know, and maybe Schwartz was trying to get him removed from there? Yeah. Where does he fit in?
I think he was part of our Joint Readiness Task Force, and that was a collaboration of multiple agencies. And Schwartz spoke about his authority to be there, and that agency, how it didn't even serve in a first response capacity. So he had authority to be there. But the question is who? And I've been asking him that question specifically, and he's given me multiple answers. At one point in time, he said that he called the Arlington fire line and just said, "Hey, I'm Billy Badass. I'm Lee Wheelbarger. I'm this, that, and the other. I've got all this certification." And they're like, "Oh yeah, sure. Come on, you get up here." And then he claims that Chief Schwartz just loved him, and he was like the chief's right-hand guy. Well, when he realized that I basically beat that to death and I totally destroyed that story, then all he starts to say is, well, the black chief authorized me. And I'm like, the black chief, like African American, like that's all you can say, just the black chief. Like, I can't even find a fire captain that was African American in the Arlington Fire Department, but I thought you called them. So yeah, he served in some type of capacity that was authorized to be there at the Pentagon. He talks about how in his first day there, he wasn't getting the types of things that he wanted and needed as far as equipment were concerned, and how he was basically threatening to call the Pentagon war room. He basically said that he did call the Pentagon war room and started making demands for certain things. I've since found in the official documents who actually brought that stuff on site. The pictures that he also shows and the things that he says indicates that he was given access to the Air Force One ground crew. That's an actual unit. And they came on site allegedly and were serving him directly. So that's a highly authorized, like top secret position. I'm assuming they're on Air Force One. They're around.
Yeah.
So there's no history to show that unit was even there. So why did he say that? And then furthermore, when he didn't get his equipment that he wanted, when he was, he expressed frustration when the war room at the Pentagon didn't get him what he wanted. He said his next call was going to be to the White House. So, his words, not mine, and you guys are going to hear all this in the video. So, had authorization there, but it's like order out of chaos. That's the I forget the name of the group, the Illuminati, I think it was, but that's their thing. It's creating order out of chaos, and it's a problem. A false flag incident pops up. They've got all the solutions for it. They wait for the reaction, and then they get the reaction they want, and then they offer these solutions that are always just a relinquishing of our rights and a number of other things. And I ultimately think that's what Lee is and his team were. They were the experts that were needed on site to deploy certain things internally and to usher in things externally. I can't get into the specifics of it, but a new witness to the event that has, somewhat spoken on it to what he saw, which was not a Boeing 757 commercial airplane, has offered to give his testimony to me. And so, ultimately, taking everything that we've talked about and adding it up, like I said before, we would need people on the ground. And, we can go to people like Richard Gage, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. We can look at people like Dr. Judy Wood, Andrew Johnson, all these people that subscribe to directed energy weapon theories. We can look at all these different people. But does their research lead to suspects? And my argument is that it doesn't. And my argument is that, it leads to very big anomalies, that have to do with weapon systems that, of course, the vast majority of people aren't going to have an understanding of, but no suspects on the ground. Lee Wheelberg. That
was the interesting part of the Richard Gage discussion that we had, and we commended him on this at the end of the interview, is he would never make any sort of an accusation or a suggestion or hypothesize about who's behind it and why. And his entire presentation, his entire discussion with us, and he was consistent in everything we watched, was always saying, as an engineer with, it was 30 some odd years of experience, a career in this industry, being part of the AIA, from this professional background, this is what I saw. These were demolitioned buildings. That's it. I will not speak on anything else. You can talk to this person, this person, this person. Actually, he's the one that gave us your name. But he said that other people, even Andrew Johnson, will speak specifically to their expertise, which I found fascinating. Now, it doesn't give us the answers we want, but it's interesting because it kind of, I think it sets that trigger in your mind when you think about it from a very, black and white perspective, no speculation around it. Once you've subscribed to the idea that it is not what you think it was, then that kind of takes us down this rabbit hole. It's like, all right, well, now we want the why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all those people. I close out on a few statements concerning the truth movement. We'll get to that and all those people. But I wish you could be totally in the know right now about everything I could say about Richard Gage and all these people running around, because your perception of what's happening would probably start to change. Your head would be spinning, and we'll get to why in a second.
Sure.
But I know we're getting pretty late into the weed. I'm going to try and get this thing wrapped up pretty soon. But,
no worries.
No worries. You've got us hooked. So
well, I appreciate that, you guys. This is only the beginning. It's wild. So May 28th, 2021, I had my first final hearing with the Veterans Administration. You know, I know at this point in time, even though we've talked, we've talked about 2022, getting into the lease stuff. But in May 28, I knew who Lee Wheelbarger was. I knew that things weren't right. Something seemed off. And so I was going through the VA process, and I was about to meet with a federal judge. And this was on my VA claim, for the different things that I was experiencing, PTSD, knees, ankles, back, all that stuff, pain. And in that, I said, Judge, and this was right in front of a DAV rep, a Disabled American Veterans rep. I said, I got to go on record. I want you to know that I was a first responder at this, the Pentagon. I'm pretty much in the process of changing the course of my life, and I'm devoting myself to getting answers on what happened. And I just want to go on record with a federal judge, with the Veterans Administration, that I don't think a plane hit the building that day, and that it was a false flag incident. And I've got people that should be investigated for all this. And the DAV rep was looking at me like, and this judge was kind of like looking at me like I was nuts. Well, that was May 28th. Lo and behold, June 17th, I get a letter addressed to me from the Department of Veterans Affairs. And it says, this concerns your Board of Veterans Appeals video held on the 28th of May. We regret to advise you that we are unable to produce a complete transcript of the proceeding due to audio malfunction heard throughout your testimony. So yeah, that got shot down really quick. So that's another question that I've had. It's just like, okay, I even then told a federal judge this, and then I was met with that type of response. So I believe our federal apparatuses have been overtaken. But all the stuff that we even talked about, that also doesn't even cover everything. I've got, another operation that I haven't really even talked about publicly that I'm going to let you guys in on really quick. Operation Trapper Keeper. That's just a breakdown of the documents. This is an example. The Arlington official after action report talks about how they got their money to conduct the after action report from a grant given by the Department of Justice, the Office of Justice Programs. We've got contract numbers, we've got order numbers, we've got all this stuff. Well, if you go to the Department of Justice and you look these things up, you really can't find much. Here, for example, I put this in. It pulled up, information about the actual document itself. It shows that the author was Titan Systems Corporation, which isn't even one of the agencies that was involved, but they took the responsibility of creating this report, and they didn't even release it until years down the road. But if you go to the Office of Justice Programs and you try to click on that PDF, it takes you away from the office and it leads you to a dead link, and so I think that's hysterical. This is an official website. Like, this is the official government website. This is where all this came from. And if you follow the white rabbit, it takes you away and leads you to a dead link. It makes no sense. And this is the way, 9/11 really is. Going even further, trying to do the different numbers that are involved. There was the order number, and then there was, the order number, the order number and the contract number. So right there, I tried to put the order number in. You don't even get any results. So another anomaly, like if you pull up the after action report and you type in General Jackson, that was the Military District of Washington commander. Lots of different references to him. Well, we remember that General Weldon gave him the order to unleash the Military District of Washington, and that's how I arrived there. Well, how come in the after action report for Arlington, General Weldon is nowhere to be found? And then furthermore, if you get into Titan Systems Corporation, you can see with like legitimate researchers into geopolitical stuff, 9/11, Daniel Hopsicker is one of them. Titan, according to him, was awash in criminal charges, political payoffs, and the Abu Ghraib torture scandal. So why are they, of all people, doing Arlington and the FBI Why are they doing their after-action report? It's further stated, and you could see this in the article that Daniel Hopsicker wrote. Another Adam, it wasn't me, but Titan. They'd mentioned, somebody, had mentioned that they did the AAR at the Pentagon, and then two of the terrorists, the alleged hijackers,
interesting,
were among the others on Flight 77 were based out of San Diego. And so it's like, what the hell is going on with the DEA? And remember the DEA and Titan, because it's relevant. But why is this dirty company doing things for Arlington? It just makes no sense. So what I started to do, and what Trapper Keeper is, Operation Trapper Keeper. I don't know if you guys had Trapper Keepers back in the day, like back in grade school.
Oh yeah, love it. And I love the little DeLorean you had on the logo too.
Absolutely. So I'm going to try and find all the documents that exist in the index of that report. And wouldn't you know it, a lot of places are giving me some really interesting responses. For example, the Office of the City Attorney of Alexandria, Virginia, point blank said they exercise their legal rights not to give anything to anybody outside, residing outside of the Commonwealth.
Really?
Yeah, and that's a law in the Code of Virginia. You can actually look this up. They can do that, which is funny because other places did not have any problem giving me stuff. For example, Arlington County Sheriff's Office. This is where I'm starting to see, this is what I'm getting most of the time. What they're saying is they don't have any records responsive to my request.
Right.
So places flex and say, piss off, you don't live here. Other places are saying that doesn't exist. Again, a FOIA request in D.C. trying to get documents that were on there, on the index of the report, they say that they're unable to locate these. Then if you get into like another after-action report by the Department of the Treasury, which is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF, this is what an after-action report is supposed to look like. You got names, you got signatures, but then, they are very honest about the problems that they encountered during the investigation, and they lit the FBI up. I mean, they talked about the numerous issues that arose, how the command structure for their team was basically their response teams were disjointed, how basically they had the FBI team leaders and managers had little to no experience in dealing with these types of scenes, and they could offer little to no guidance to others. One problem said that there were no daily meetings between the agency heads at the site, and if there were, the ATF wasn't even included. Talked about how the FBI was reluctant to utilize ATF expertise or its equipment, and how in one case, an ATF bomb tech had to handle a suspicious package outside of the Pentagon grounds because the bomb tech at the FBI basically was approaching it the wrong way, with the bomb, didn't have the bomb suit or anything, it didn't have wasn't prepared to do anything.
Does that, my mind goes to, this kind of brings me back to earlier in the conversation of higher-ups knowing that there really was nothing going on. Were these just FBI cronies, if you will, that were kind of slapped in there? They were just kind of like, hey, you gotta go hang out there for a little bit, pretend like you're doing some shit. And the ATF is like, what the fuck is going on? We've got a real investigation on our hands. Shit happened. And why is the FBI not doing what the FBI should be doing?
Amen, brother. And here's the thing. They had so many people deployed to that site. Why were old guard soldiers? Because the FBI, and I'm going to show you guys testimony here pretty soon, the old guard soldiers were basically the off-the-books unit that were doing everything that the FBI was supposed to be doing. Or the old guard was the off-the-books unit that was doing everything that the FBI was supposed to be doing. And you can look at so many different examples. And I was going to include this one James Schwartz testimony in this interview that we're doing, where he talks about how basically in earlier part of 2001, Chris Combs, the agent that was in charge of the FBI's response at the Pentagon, had approached him and talked about how there was going to be a joint operations center basically in the event of any type of national emergency, that when operating with local agencies would basically take over the command from them. And James talked about at the time how in 2001 he thought, like, what in the hell? That makes no sense. I don't know how that would really work. And then he mentioned, that they've never had any other talks or meetings about it. But then on September 11th, that's exactly what happened. The Joint Operations Center was basically sent over to Fort Myer. The FBI's command center was off site. Why would you move your command center away from the Pentagon to Fort Myer? And then the chief talked about how basically he was going to meetings over there, and he was like, this doesn't make any sense. He was going off site, and that night he went home, he took a shower, he rested for a little bit, and he went back, and he drove directly to the FBI's command center. And I can show this in an interview. He basically said, this doesn't make any sense. I'm pulling myself and my people away. I can't do what needs to be done if I'm leaving the site and coming over here to Fort Myer. He mentioned how Chris Combs was pissed off about that, and even how James Schwartz had offered to keep a liaison between the FBI and the Arlington firefighters on him at all times. And even then, it was not really great with Chris Combs. And furthermore, while the incident was happening earlier that day on the 11th, there were allegedly a lot of different planes that were coming into the D.C. region. And for that reason, when Chris Combs got attached to James Schwartz on the grounds, you can also find evidence of this in interviews. He talks about how, basically Schwartz was receiving his word from the FBI, and they were saying, incoming flights, get everybody out of here. So the flight that they said that was, that went down in Shanksville, they actually said that day, they told Schwartz and others that it had hit Camp David. And so, yeah, Schwartz was receiving his direction directly from Combs, the head of the FBI on site. So when you see things like this, what the ATF had to say.
Sure.
And with what Schwartz had to say in that interview, and then I'm gonna, in the closing of of what we're doing today, I'm gonna offer a couple more really quick testimonies. I unfortunately didn't grab them. I'm gonna grab them right here.
Go ahead.
They are in my office floor, but there's two testimonies that I like to close with on top of all the shit that I already gave you guys. This one is Voices of the 9/11 Pentagon Recovery Effort, that book on the left. And there's a reason why I think this is important. And we talked a little bit about the DEA. Daniel Hopsicker talked about the DEA. Titan Systems Corporation was awash with corruption in San Diego. So there's a DEA tie there. Well, this is where I find this testimony by a gentleman named Christopher Bradley. He was in the old guard. He was in a different company than me. But on page 23 of this book, it says, as the DEA completed their evidence searches, they boxed up the findings and loaded them into white unmarked Isuzu moving trucks. As the ranking soldier in my team, I was stuck driving. My team was armed, and I was given a paper map with step-by-step instructions. The brakes were so bad, I remember them to this day with great distaste. We left the Pentagon, traveled to a secret government warehouse, and unloaded the evidence. The warehouse contained retired presidential limousines, huge items under thick plastic, and I'm sure the Ark of the Covenant from Raiders of the Lost Ark, but we didn't see it. Damn you, high-milled plastic. This is interesting. He said that same day we were treated with a quick visit to the DEA headquarters in Pentagon City. The agent gave us some DEA shirts to wear while we transported the evidence. I felt like I was cheating on the Army while I wore it, but seeing the envy in a few of my battle buddies' eyes made it bearable. Okay, so much to break down there. The FBI had chain of custody, so why was the DEA doing these things? Why were they the ones that were holding evidence that was supposed to be contaminated evidence that had human remains, asbestos,
Sure.
A lot of different contaminants that were in the construction. So why were old guard soldiers using barely movable, off the books likely box trucks? They were armed. Remember, I didn't get anything.
Yep.
And the DEA only, and this was verified by the official documents, they only served in the capacities of sifting through evidence on a voluntary basis. So I want to know who those volunteers were. But it's kind of like anything else. They're over there sifting through evidence, and all of a sudden, they find the evidence.
Sure.
And so we brought everything out of that building, the old guard did, and we took it, we put it into bins, and those bins were transferred over to the north parking lot and to 2 different areas. But the DEA was allegedly operating in those capacities, sifting evidence. So that's huge in my opinion right there. That shows that the FBI did not have chain of custody, and that evidence was not treated as if it was contaminated. That's a big damn deal. And then last but not least, I go to this book right here, Firefight Inside the Battle to Save the Pentagon on 9/11, and to page 383. And it says right here, point blank, FEMA and the FBI had decided it was important to separate airplane wreckage from everything else. So as crews pulled debris apart, they'd examine it to figure out if it looked like part of an airplane or something from inside the building. They were still working on the fringe of the impact zone, and most of the wreckage was shredded in tatters. Here's the most important thing. In fact, hardly any of the recovery crews had any idea how to identify portions of an airplane, nor did the FBI agents. So workers would hold up a piece of metal looking for rivets or highly machined aluminum to help them guess. Airplane, they would say to each other. Airplane, a couple of voices would then answer back. The parts would then go to a special bin, which would be hauled outside once it filled up and emptied into a bigger container near the rubble piles. All the pieces of debris went to separate bins and then to a huge sifting lot set up in the north parking lot where agents raked through it. They say that they didn't have any idea what they were looking for, but that's what they have serial numbers for.
Right.
So I can get into the details of that, but we've been on here for a while. I'm just going to tell you that, exposing Lee Wheelbarger is taken. This issue is being addressed. I am writing about all this shit that we talked about and a lot more. I've got a $5,000 debate challenge out to the world, to anybody thinks that they can defend the public position that Boeing, Flight 77 hit the building on 9/11. I think that ultimately that was the Pentagon was the eye of the storm, and the towers were really the look over here.
Sure. Sure.
And we kept our attention drawn on that.
Right.
And ultimately, if you want to really look at how to pick it apart, you guys just did it. I'm just, I'm not the first person that was there to really beat on it. I'm the second person. The first person was April Gallup, and she took it to court and she lost. I'm going to take this to a lot of different ways, and I really believe that my team and I are going to be able to show. And we haven't even started, you guys. We talked for probably like 2.5, 3 hours. We didn't even get into the Lee Wheelbarger testimony. But in final closing, this picture right here represents really my journey. The 9/11 Truth movement is not interested in 9/11 truth. And so I'm collecting all the evidence I can, much like what you guys saw. There is a shit ton more of it. And when it's finally put up into Word and into video form where it can be easily seen and digested, which will be soon, I am working on this issue very, very hard. I'm then going to turn to these people that are the quote-unquote experts. And they already know about my debate challenge. They are already running from me. They have been running from me or acting like I don't exist for several years now. But they are going to get... they're going to get the wrath. And, I got no problem with people having opinions that are different of mine. But if you're a researcher or you're an influencer on the subject, you should be, I guess you could say, listening to people who are there. And as you guys saw, I can speak to a lot of anomalies. And it seems that, the peddlers of 9/11 truth are not interested in me talking. And I think it has to do with them, at best, being charlatans that are trying to keep the gravy train and try to keep the lights on them. At worst, they are counterintelligence professionals, and you can look these people up. There is an acronym. It's COINTELPRO. It stands for Counterintelligence Programs. It's COINTELPRO. But I am going to be stomping on some of these fucking people in the coming months and the years. And I want to say, you guys, I thank you so much for having me. I thank you for your devotion to truth, devotion to getting this story out, and just to doing your best to shed light. And so as things continue to develop, you guys will be kept in the loop. I can assure you that nobody is working harder than the Pentagon issue right now on the planet than me. So thank you.
Adam, I mean, I got to tell you, this is incredible. I don't think this went anywhere close to the direction I thought we were going to go. You came in loaded. I had a couple questions for you here.
Yep.
Number one, do you own that domain, exposingleewheelbarger.com?
I do.
Okay. I thought somebody else bought it. I was going to die laughing if somebody else owns
I love it.
I could put this shit all up there right now, you guys, but here's my strategy, and the best practitioners of war can say their strategy right out in front of everybody, and they can't do anything. That's Sun Tzu. Lee Wheelbarger is going to have to confess, and he's going to have to admit. And I'm just going to keep applying pressure on him. It's jujitsu. It's the gentle art. Every time he says something, I'm going to apply pressure in a different way. And it's just, I've got him so cornered so bad. He's going to have to admit to his shit. And, I can probably talk on this subject for 10, 15, 20 hours. And so that's why my debate is, it's supposed to be an untimed debate challenge, because somebody's going to have to get in there and deal with the information I have on this guy and the other testimonies that I have. You guys, we haven't even gotten into the other witnesses that I can break apart like that.
Dude, you have information. I can I can solidly say of any guest that we've had on thus far, nobody has the information and the recall that you have, bar none. It's
on any subject.
On anything.
On any subject.
Well, I appreciate that, you guys. This is my life. I got up into the corporate world right before COVID kicked off. I got a real estate license, and I did a year of real estate, and I liked it. But I saw COVID for what it was, and nothing turns me on and puts me on fire like this.
Oh yeah.
And I just once you sign up for the Army and you take those vows to defend the country, there's something that changes in you, and I still believe in what we have to offer here. It's still the best place. It's worth sacrificing over. We've just been totally ransacked by, like Tulsi said, this cabal of sick fucks.
Yeah.
And, we're going to take it back. It just requires very patient, effort day in and day out. So
if there's ever been evidence that somebody is telling the truth about something, especially a politician, Tulsi Gabbard was just absolutely lambasted by Hillary Clinton when she first tried to run for the Democratic primary. What was that, in 2020, I guess?
Yes.
And then most recently, she was put on a terrorist flight list. She became a flight risk and was not allowed to fly. Now, this is somebody who is an elected politician and who was once considered, potentially a future Democratic presidential nominee or power player in the party, since left. But I mean, to put your political career at stake and effectively kill it by doing that, and then to be put on a terrorist list as a United States elected official, to be put on a terrorist list, you can't fly. Yeah. Obviously tells you something's happening and somebody's leaning onto something. Are you concerned at all that by kind of, I don't want to use the word attacking, because I don't think that's really what you're doing. I think that's too much of a negative connotation, but going after Wheelbarger here, are you concerned at all that there's going to be a repercussion on you or your family or people close to you, that he's just going to kind of hit that breaking point where he's not going to want to be the one that's going to give it up?
You guys have only seen chapters like 1 through 6. You haven't seen the latest chapter. So I recently went on a podcast. I don't know if you guys were made aware of it. It was with a guy by the name of Faust Chicho. He's a former filmmaker. He does acting. He's a lot of stuff. But he's got a podcast called Far Out with Faust. He's got a very robust following, a professional studio in his house. I went down to Atlanta, did it. Wow. By far the best podcast I've ever done to date with him. And this was in the last couple months. And I sent that video to Wheelbarger because we really got into the deals of it. And I was like, hey, I'm starting to stomp on your balls this way now. Prepare yourself. And we went at it, in that he blocked me, of course, the X chat. But we finally, I didn't realize he was doing it. But when we were going at it for like 3.5 hours, this was a few weeks ago, he was in the middle of a live audience. 600 people were watching us. And I was just roasting this guy. And I've been wondering for like 3+ years, what's this guy going to actually be able to use against me? Because there's nothing.
Right.
Well, I was finally able to see what the hell he's going to use against me. And what he found, there's one time when I spoke on this incident when I simply misspoke and I said that I arrived on the 12th. Well, there's a lot of 11s and 12s.
Sure.
So I got him to see, he basically found the one time where I accidentally said the 12th, and now he's saying that I stolen valor. Well, to your point, he went further. He then threatened me. He went to his Twitter and he doxed me. He put my address up. Like,
yep. That's the stuff that starts to concern, because it doesn't have to be him.
Sure.
It could be one of these lunatics that are just brainwashed that will do the dirty work for him.
Well, and this is no shit. I haven't even said this before on a podcast. When I got married to my wife, the world will most likely never see my wife and child. Like, I'll never use them as a prop in my story or anything. Like, I will never do that. But I laid it out, and my wife met me, went through my activism. She saw me a few years ago and just started following me. We became friends, and we just slowly started to
That's
talk.
awesome.
But I told her, like, this is real shit. Like, it's very, very, very real. And so when we got married, we set our marriage up and our family up to where I don't own anything. This house, I'm not on any of this shit. Like, there's nothing anybody can do to fuck with me. And so I've had to ask myself, outside of the threats, he threatened to come to my house. I carry weapons everywhere. Where I live, I can carry shit, everywhere. But I also live in a rural area that's surrounded by some good neighbors. Everybody keeps an eye on everybody.
Yeah.
But if God forbid that man ever tries anything, I'm prepared for it. My family's prepared for it. But yeah, we've crossed that bridge. We have crossed that bridge. He has doxed me, and so now my plan, what I'm basically doing is all those points of evidence where I'm collecting. I'm basically clipping all of it and putting it to Twitter, and then I'm writing a digital book to highlight everything chronological order, and I'm crossing it over to where you can click on the hyperlink and pull it up on Twitter and hear everything he said. So it just goes back and forth. But I'm going to bug this guy, and I'm just going to keep leaning on him. And my goal is to be on the Joe Rogan podcast in the next, I would say, 12 calendar months. We've got connections, mutual connections. I've pretty much just said, let me get everything that I can get together, and let me then push the button.
Well, right, have it ready to go, because you go on Rogan and that takes the the top off the jar a little bit, and the floodgates open, and then at that point, I mean, life changes dramatically.
Yeah, and you guys, believe it or not, you two guys are my last public appearance booked. I have specifically basically told my team, I'm like, listen, I'm taking my stuff out of the public speaking realm for, the next however many months. Mm-hmm. I've been invited to one more engagement where I'm going to speak to Andrew Johnson and a bunch of other people. We're going to talk about our experiences dealing with the truth movement and kind of tell war stories in a little group. But giving collaborations like this, I'm pushing the pause button until I get that stuff done. And I'm in hyperdrive. Like, we've got a 7-month-old. I've got a newborn, and it's exhausting. I don't know if you guys have kids.
Yes, we do.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, we've been there.
You guys get it. Yeah. And so my wife is on board. Everything's on board, but we have no free time. I have no free time. I'm devoted to this, and this is going to be my life's work. I genuinely believe that my team and I, in conjunction and in relation to all the other stuff, will be the first people to really say that we were able to take this thing from conspiracy to reality. It just sucks because it took a little bit longer than I wish it would have. But the battleground got laid in all these years. So I used to give myself kind of a hard time because I was like, man, I wish I would have done this earlier. But it gave everybody else to take a position, which allows me to kind of see what people do. And I've really been able to also kind of uncover I would say 20 to 30 people that are operating in a counterintelligence position globally. And I've been able to build my argument. But what you guys just saw, this presentation, I don't think that could be debunked by anybody, by any skeptic, by anything. And when my shit really gets up there, good luck. Yeah.
It's funny because you talk about the 11th and the 12th issue, and this is almost becoming a tagline for our show. We always say that when there's holes in the truth, there can be 1,000 holes, especially with 9/11. There's so many things that don't add up. Everyone, because that's the official narrative, just seems to dismiss it. Oh, that's just a weird coincidence. Oh, that doesn't, they just messed that up. But when you're trying to debunk the official narrative, when you present a counterpoint to it, if there is one thing that you say that is wrong, like you misspoke on the 11th and the 12th, discredit it. And everyone latches on. Every single other point you can make can be 100% verifiable. You misspoke one time because, God forbid, you be a human being and you slip up on your words. It's unbelievable to me. It's just a weird thing for people to do.
Oh, and here's the hysterical thing. 2 points to what you just said. There was a researcher that received public props by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth that told me a long time ago. He said, if you're really going to do this, he's like, you just have to understand they're going to use every single thing they can use against you. And it's like you're taking a shot, if you're shot clustering. It might be a little bit off, but those little distance between the shots, that's what they're going to use to kind of pry and to try and cast doubt. The funny thing is that in Wheelbarger's, big defense against me recently, where he took that 12th example and then used that, in that same evening, in that same video, he screamed that Alexandria was the one that authorized him to be there. Well, I thought it was Arlington that authorized you to be there. So he did the same thing I did.
Right.
Yes, it's like, you fucking moron. But it's like, whatever. So yeah, I'm going to keep you guys up to speed, and believe you me, when these videos, when these pause and play videos come out, you'll see.
I love it. I just want to say, I'm sorry, Shane, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go.
9/11 impacted millions of people, right? Between the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, between the DC area, what occurred in Pennsylvania. I grew up in New York. I grew up in the forgotten borough of Staten Island, which is kind of a shit-on borough part of New York City. But Staten Island, actually, we had more people lost in the Twin Towers from Staten Island than any other borough or any other state, any other borough in New York City. But I went to funerals of friends' parents that died in the towers. Different than what we're talking about today, of course, right? This is centered on the Pentagon. But it affected me. Shane, you grew up in New Jersey, very close. You had, connections as well. And so did millions of other people. And it's not a woe on me by any stretch of the imagination. But as I got older, it never really sat right with me. The official narrative nothing added up. 1 + 1 never equaled 2. And it's great to see somebody of your accolades, your background, the devotion that you have to just really taking the bull by the horns and saying, fuck you, I'm going at it. Like, it's awesome. It really is it's so awesome to see that.
Well, I appreciate that, and it just goes back to, people have to understand my why, and that's why I try to tell them it goes beyond just correcting the wrong of the obvious, the mass murder that took place. There are real personal things that go deep into my bones about just who I am and what I'm about, and it's like a rooster that sees the sun in the morning. They're not going to shut up. So who knows what this is going to cost me? I have faith that the average American sees the problem. And that I'm not walking myself into getting suicided, but I appreciate your kind words, because I can just tell you that's the kind of shit that fuels me, in these long hours when I'm tired and just trying to do things and just presenting information, getting attacked by these people that are trying to step up. I'll tell you, the counterintelligence forces are real, you guys, and so I ask anybody, especially you guys, use your discernment. Just use your discernment when it comes to this shit, because the truth always rises to the top, and it's pretty easy to see when you really start to get into the thick of it.
Unfortunately, we're in an era now where people are starting to think with a little more discourse. They're using things like Twitter to be able to find truth, do research on subjects you couldn't do research on before. Before we kind of wrap things up, the one question that's lingering on my mind the entire time, you don't have to answer if you don't want. What happens to the plane? Where is Flight 77?
Okay, so there's a gentleman that I'm currently trying to. We've been filling each other out. We've got some connections, some people between us. And his name is Mark Conlon. You guys, I think, did you guys talk to?
Is he a pilot?
No, in fact, he isn't. He's a gentleman that lives, I believe, over in the UK.
Okay, I think I know the name. I don't remember why though.
Well, he knows a lot of those guys. You guys know Norman, 9/11 revisionist. Yeah.
Yep, Norman messaged us. Yeah, he's been helping us quite a bit on giving some information. Yep.
I would definitely get in touch with Mark Conlon, and I'm not trying to not answer that question, but that's where he goes heavy. That's his
awesome.
shit.
I'd love to know that. Yeah.
So I want to definitely give him some props. The only thing is that he's been on holiday. He's been having some issues, and so we haven't had the chance to really connect.
Sure.
I've also been going through some personal shit as well, so I've got to
I'm sorry to hear.
Amount of time. That's all good. It's life, but I was going to say he gets into that, and he talks about just the ways that. I want to give him that opportunity and reach out and I'll even coordinate. I'll say, Norman, you got to get Mark Conlon in front of these guys. So
that'd be awesome. Yeah, that'd be really awesome. Yeah. Where do we find you? How can people that are out there listening find you, find the Orion Project, and maybe help out however possible?
Yeah, just go to my Instagram, which is Awakened Adam. From there, you can see a lot of other things. I'm going to have a website. It's all going to be up and running eventually. It just takes some time. This is an investigation. I want to get things right, and I'm in a position to do just that. And so just keep your eyes out and go to my Instagram and just add me and chill and just wait.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for spending the time with us here tonight. To everyone else out there that is listening and watching, please share this with anybody you know that you think might be remotely interested. There's a lot to digest here. I know that, but it's important stuff as you start to kind of question what's going on in your reality. It's an interesting time because the government is lying to you and they're getting exposed almost right away now. So it's weird to kind of look back in our past and find this kind of stuff. Do not forget to like and subscribe on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, Rumble, wherever you are listening or watching. And until next time, we will see you all later.